Well, hello there. Hi, chat. How you doing? Looks like we're still waiting for people to come in. So, for a brief moment, here we will just kind of hang out, say hello, and as usual, introduce everyone. Welcome back uh, to Historians versus New World. You see, our guest this week seems to be a field of reeds with a very dapper-looking hat.
Thank you.
So,
My oh
yeah,
sorry.
obviously, not all guests can have or want to have cameras, and so we are accommodating of that here. And so, here we are. The tea of the day, this dude, is a cinnamon pu'er. Highly recommend. Very warming. Very tasty.
That sounds lovely.
Exactly. Do you have a tea?
Especially for I have some English breakfast tea, but
It's a
that's
classic.
not seasonal.
It's a classic.
True.
Anyway, if you've been around here for a while, you know who our guest today is. It's Reed. Has been
Hello.
all over the place. Well, I mean, we've been in online spaces together for years and years now. That's like three, which is scary. Uh,
Oh dear, yeah.
yeah,
You're right about that.
yeah, it has been. But do you want to introduce yourself and what you do? Because it's a lot of things.
Yes, I have a lot going on. But to introduce myself, I'm Reed. If you haven't been around, you can always go back and check out the BioShock Infinite streams. Those were fun, and I was there, I think, until the last episode.
Yeah.
But anyway, I currently have a completed a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Religious Studies, and in April I should also get a Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology, because my joke answer to why is I have never made a career choice in my life and don't intend to.
I like it.
So I'm doing a lot at once, and it's honestly wonderful. But I've actually found some cool ways to merge the two.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you want to give a couple examples?
Sure. Well,
Or
one of the most recent papers I've written and I'm trying to get published at the moment is a paper about Protestant conceptions of cholera in the 19th century. I A lot of my recent work has been trying to focus on how to look at religious conceptions of disease, how religious people think of and incorporate disease into their religious worldview, and also how they experience it, because their experience is shaped by their religious beliefs. Because generally, like, for example, someone who's very sick and maybe ardently Catholic might write a letter to a Catholic shrine or have prayer cards or various things that alter their experience of their illness. There's already a few wonderful studies out there, like Robert Orsi did a great study on the cult of the saints in 20th century Catholicism. But I'm trying to flesh that field out a little bit more,
ooh,
generally focus on
that
that aspect.
sounds excellent. Because,
Yeah,
well, obviously, churches were a big part in both sort of public health policy uh, in the 19th century and also still today still have a huge influence on how people think about disease and what actions people do to deal with it.
absolutely. I am totally going to draw a ton of
Oh,
comparisons to
100%.
COVID-19. Oh,
Were
uh,
there any that stood out to you as like particularly surprising?
any that, sorry, what was the original?
Any of those comparisons that you've noticed that stood out to you as particularly surprising between health policy with churches in the 19th century versus 2021?
Oh, yeah, there was sometimes I was reading along with some older, very ardently Calvinist Presbyterian ministers. They at the 1830s was when cholera really hit America,
Mm-hmm.
and so on that onset, a lot of more Calvinist ministers were very clear about this being some form of God's punishment. And while that argument is not as popular today, there are still people repeating that same argument and using some of the same rhetoric that they incorporated. And it was really interesting to see the ways that some ways it didn't change at all, though there were some interesting ones, like more Methodist publications tended to frame sickness and disease as a teaching opportunity where you would be bedridden for a couple of days, and then after having time to reflect on your life and how you've been living it, you could go out back into the world and maybe change your ways or something like that. And it turns that kind of sickness into a religious experience, which is really interesting, but not something that really appears nowadays.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, and luckily, a lot more churches have been, a lot of mainline churches have been very good about following public health procedures, and it's been really cool to see the ways that they've tried to keep their religious community together, as well as altering theological language. Like, I've seen a few Church of England documents frame the pandemic almost like a pilgrimage, which is fascinating because it takes this, although you can't physically move around, it takes this experience of sheltering in place and makes it transformative in some way.
Interesting. Huh. I would need to think about that to have a whole lot competent or interesting to say in response, but that no, that is super cool.
It is, and you're all good. I know trying to combine disease and religion is a very niche thing,
Oh,
but it's
sure.
very cool. I, at least when I was writing about cholera, I incorporated some interesting facts about just how cholera is a waterborne microbe. Interestingly enough, it's not actually very acid resistant, so you need to ingest a lot of it to get sick.
Huh. Interesting. Does the nature of cholera being waterborne end up affecting anything in the religious conception?
I would say yes, because surprisingly, out of cholera, there was a lot of people who were pushing for temperance as a result. They connected actually drunkenness to cholera, that same kind of ingesting liquids, but also just they they emphasize the importance of like clean water and drinking and consuming clean things as part of like temperance and being a good Christian, like incorporating good things into your diet. Although they were kind of off about the reasoning because this was still before they found the cholera microbe,
Oh.
Vibrio cholera, and before germ theory was really popularized, they were still promoting temperance as a way to prevent it. They were coming at it as temperance is a way to make yourself virtuous, and so by being virtuous, you won't get sick because only sinful people get sick in their view, or at
Right.
least some people's.
Yes.
And so I do think that the waterborne nature of cholera impacted that movement.
Interesting.
And at least with COVID, the overall the nature of microbes generally being kind of invisible to the human eye
Mm-hmm.
unless you culture them on some kind of media. I think that impacts generally how religious communities respond because without physically being able to see differences in, oh, someone is like that person is sick, or you can see the microbes physically being transferred, your beliefs about how it spreads and things like that can impact your religious conceptions of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of 19th century, going back to the 19th century, if you couldn't tell, I love the 19th century from a religious history standpoint. But the so a few people actually commented on how quickly it spread and identified a lack of scientific explanation and a general like how quickly it spread without opposition in its early days to claiming that it's from a divine origin because science could not provide a better explanation at the time because miasma theory was still in in fashion and they weren't able to really contain it in the early days like 1830s, 1840s,
Yep.
1850s. They were getting better at it, and they improved after that point. But they were saying, "Oh, no one's stopping this, so it's clearly an act of God because no one can overcome that."
Yep. And obviously, unlike with a lot of earlier outbreaks, right? If we go back to early modernity and pre-modernity, plague, quarantines don't work quite as well against cholera because
Yeah.
you need to drink water, and that comes from a communal supply, regardless of whether you're physically moving or not.
Hmm.
So, right, obviously, I
And
think it probably doesn't have no impact because if you can quarantine people so that their waste doesn't end up in community water, that
very
helps.
true.
Uh,
Yeah.
But, right, a lot of the public policy that used to work uh, ends up functioning a bit differently against cholera. So that makes both practical sense and then is distressingly familiar with a completely unrelated virus.
Definitely. There were some, of course, as a result, there were people who tried to take a religious response to stopping the virus. In their view, it was calling for fast days and days of prayer.
Yeah.
Specifically, they titled it like days of prayer and humiliation.
Huh.
And those, they basically were in a response to the amount of how quickly people were dying. A lot of people are dying very quickly because cholera can manifest symptoms in, I think, 24 hours roughly of the cholera microbe colonizing your gut.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can get very dehydrated as a result of loss of liquids and die very quickly. So someone who was suddenly fine one day is dead by the end of the week.
Yeah.
And so this rapid death caused a lot of fear and anxiety, and people turned to religion in those fast days. And a unique example from Pittsburgh, actually, is this one Catholic community started praying to St. Roch and the Virgin Mary to deliver them. And according to their local tradition, it worked. And so annually, every year after, they have celebrated Cholera Day every, I think it's August. Yeah, every August to kind of give thanks for that.
Incredible. That's that is a joyful little folk tradition.
Yeah, and in at least pandemic times, they've co-opted COVID-19 into it, asking for deliverance from this current pandemic
Of
as
course they
well.
have.
Yeah, because religious traditions, they're fun and change over time, and,
Uh huh.
you know, disease, it's constant.
It's everywhere all the time, and it's not a status effect that lasts 10 seconds.
Yes.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
Turns out, disease is somewhat more serious than that.
Yeah, I've always been kind of disappointed in the way that most games do disease because sometimes it can be a lifelong thing if it's chronic, or it can be a seriously life-altering experience.
Yeah.
I can't remember the hymn writer off the top of my head, but one hymn writer had a religious experience while being sick with cholera. They were bedridden for days, and they were reflecting on their life, trying to think of realizing I could be living more virtuously in a Protestant Christian sense. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes.
Yes.
Oh, I see AC in the chat said,
Yep.
"What's your take on how Skyrim can pray your disease away?" It's it's interesting now that I've done more research into different religious responses to disease and trying to pray disease away. It does feel a little bit more real from a religious studies standpoint, but that's also a very quick removal of disease
Uh,
that happens suddenly, and also you don't need to do anything. You just hit a button on a shrine. You
uh,
don't.
that I think is the big one, is that it's performing the surface level acts of pilgrimage, and then it
Yeah,
just works. Right, because obviously that's drawing on medieval ideas of, say, go pray at the shrine of Thomas Becket and perform some ablution there in Canterbury, and that'll cure you of basically anything short of being dead, and even that's negotiable.
absolutely. There's it's just so in Skyrim, it's just so you click a button and it's no impact on you. You don't have to sit through like a little cutscene of your character praying or anything. You don't even need to believe in the deity or be a follower of the deity in any sense. And so it's very odd.
Yes, I would agree. Also, it's too easy, right?
Yeah,
You
very
do
much so.
you do the act of pilgrimage to wherever the closest town is. That's not
To bring
actually
up
a meaningful hardship. That's designed to result in purification as a result.
Robert Orsi's study on 20th century Catholic communities, they're physically going to a shrine for a disease, for an ailment of some kind. It was both important in actually getting you out and into the community again, because disease is shockingly isolating to people, whether it's infection or whether it's a more chronic disease that limits your mobility. And just the act of going somewhere gets you out into the community, as well as kind of writing letters, doing various kinds of things like novenas to try and like pray that God does not make your disease worse or pray that you can get healed. And
Hmm.
so it's important that like there's time invested into these actions. It's more meaningful than I will just go up to this one random place, be here for a second and leave.
Yeah. Yep. I think the other half of that though is especially. I think that's probably less true in the 20th century, but in
Yeah.
medieval or pseudo medieval things, right? A multi-day trip means you are spending the night somewhere, and if you are a pilgrim, you're at a care house
Mm-hmm.
where there are people who actually know what they're doing, sort of. Right, so not only are you out in the community receiving emotional support, but you also can receive literal care at those
Exactly.
houses.
There are a shocking amount of different hospitals and medical schools founded by religious communities, and it's usually for something like that in a way where people want to be treated by their own religious community
Yeah.
and within their kind of social group.
AC, please do not try and speedrun Santiago the pilgrimage of Santiago de Compostela. Please do not try and speedrun that. That is an IRL speedrun. That will hurt.
Oh yeah, that I could see that being very painful, and I'd love to see like some marathon runner try and do it.
I'm sure that
But
someone already has, because,
true.
oh my god. For anyone who doesn't know, that in the strictest definition, the pilgrimage of Santiago de Compostela runs across the northern half of Spain, laterally across basically the entire country. But the expanded version of it has offshoots that reach into Italy, Czechia, Germany, northern France, and then connects into the trade routes or to the pilgrimage routes up into Canterbury and even farther beyond. So, yeah, like the farthest branch is from modern Poland to the far edge of Spain.
Yeah, it's a very long pilgrimage and a classic one.
It is probably the classic one. At
Absolutely.
least on the continent, right? In England, it's the Canterbury pilgrimage, but on the continent, it's Rome and Santiago de Compostela.
It is interesting how some Protestant literature, I'm thinking of like John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress,
Ooh.
takes pil- takes pilgrimage and makes it less about where you are and more about how you're being spiritually transformed during it.
Yep.
But yes,
I mean, I like that because that accounts for questions of, like, if you pay someone else to go on pilgrimage, how do you receive the benefits?
exactly. But pilgrimage very important, and
And a lot of walking.
yeah, a lot of walking.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting how all these factors, just to tie it back into what I was saying originally, all these factors impact how religious individuals and communities experience disease, because their
Mhm.
experience of disease is shaped by this.
Sure.
The kind of food they eat, the care they get, the ways that they try and process the trauma of disease, it's all impacted by their religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating. I've already applied to several grad schools and waiting to hear back, but this is
Good
exactly the
luck.
kind of work that I've kind of advertised as one thing to do in grad school.
Cool. Now, why don't we turn our attention at this point towards New World and its ideas of religion?
Ah, fun.
Yep. Have you been in chat much to see much of anything of this game?
It's been off and on. I have this last semester I was working on my capstone paper, which
Of course.
I'll talk about shortly, but
Please do.
it's been quite a busy semester, and so I haven't seen a ton of the game, but I have seen parts.
Of course. I certainly have inflicted it upon you because the main religious group in this game, as we roll into it, is unfortunately one of the player factions. So let's
Ah,
start by
wonderful.
talking. Well, actually, let's not quite start by talking there. Let's instead talk about the holiday festival quick, and then we'll cycle back to the factions.
Sounds good.
Because guess what, chat? It is the holiday festival time. We can do limited time activities, which mostly include mining a new material. Hooray. You can get stuff. And instead of Santa Claus, they have the serial numbers filed off legally distinct from Santa Claus, the Winter Wanderer. To facilitate
Uh,
the joy and cheer of winter convergence, visit them in Everfall, Monarch's Bluffs, Brightwood, or Weaver's Fen to meet the Winter Wanderer and carry out his holiday quests. Look at that. And they center on a tree of light. Interesting. Oh no.
yeah,
Oh, this is something.
it's very, I don't know. It feels like they're just mashing together all kinds of various winter holidays.
I think that's a safe bet. I mean, they seem
Yeah.
to have a Yeti right there.
Oh, there. Yeah.
Here
Well,
we
I guess
go.
pretty much any MMO does something like that.
Yeah,
Vague holidays,
exactly.
harvest festivals, winter things, all that.
Exactly. And I don't blame them for doing that because that is a way to attempt to be inclusive to the player base.
Yeah.
It's a bit ham-fisted because it's clearly just Christmas with the serial numbers filed off.
hmm
But also, I don't blame them for sacrificing the historical practice of various religions in favor of creating something that is inclusive to the players. That sounds like it's just like a good idea. Oh, hello.
Definitely. Oh,
That
that's
that
pretty.
that being said, it is just Christmas with the serial numbers filed off.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though, like, our conceptions of most of our practices of Christmas come from the mid to late 19th century, this
They
definitely
sure do.
has those vibes.
It does. As a matter of fact, I wonder if there's a whole lot we can actually say about this. But thank you, by the way. My name is UQ for the Prime sub 2 months in a row. But yeah, I think it does speak to something, right? Do we get to talk about your? Actually, we got to talk about your favorite topic.
Oh.
It's just civil religion.
Yeah.
It is absolutely
Civil
just civil religion.
Okay, for those who don't know, yeah, I have a few special areas near and dear to my heart. 19th century religion, civil religion, and recently cemetery studies, but we'll get to that in a moment. But civil religion, wonderful. It is using a religious studies lens to examine how people interact with civil symbols and how basically certain implied religious attitudes are manifested in the civil sphere. You'll see that in like presidential inaugurations. Like, honestly, Joe Biden's has been one of the most religious inaugurations I've ever seen. And you'll see various things like In God We Trust in the US. And of course, around the globe, this counts for a lot of nations. They have their own founding myths and ways in which a certain religious orientation is kind of implied in their civil rhetoric and life. But
And I think
wonderful.
the variant form of that is, of course, in their holiday practices. Because I think it's
Yes.
safe to say that Christmas is generally considered to be a secularized holiday in America.
Nowadays, yes, it is, again, still has a lot of religious implications and connotations, but celebrating Christmas has become a integral, in some ways, part of American identity, along with like Thanksgiving and the 4th of July. Those
Huh.
are just main holidays that you celebrate.
Both
Even
19th century constructions. Hooray.
yes, so many 19th century constructions. So much of the American identity is 19th century, and that is mostly why I'm interested in that century.
So, yeah, right. Because, well, Santa Claus and giving presents are not really Christian things, they are implicitly Christian.
Yes, like, of course, Saint Nicholas is Saint Nicholas,
Yeah,
and
though, remember, historically accurate St. Nicholas complaining about the date of Easter and doing nothing else of note.
yes. Oh, but I mean, we do get the probably apocryphal tale of him hitting Arius, and everyone loves to bring that up.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, yeah, Saint Nicholas, a lot of apocryphal tales around him, but very interesting figure, definitely a Christian. It's just overall, nowadays, with the way that Santa is portrayed in modern American culture, it is further distanced from religion in order to be more inclusive and more consumerist. So,
Hooray.
love that.
Exactly. And I think, I don't know, the consumerism part of it is hard to get away from here. Because it's so weird that religious identity is now consumable in a way that I don't think was true 100 years ago.
Depends what I mean. 100 years ago was the 1920s, and
That's
American
fair.
consumerism was very much was getting underway in the like 1880s, 90s, but by the 1920s, it was definitely there.
Okay.
Because I love bringing up Billiken, I think is what it's called. It's a tiny little doll that's advertised as a god of good luck, and became
What?
popular in that time.
Wait, what? I know
Yes.
nothing about this. Tell me more.
Oh, I posted about it a little bit on my server, but I think it was designed in 1907. If I'm remembering off the top of my head, I'll double check just because my memory sometimes fails.
Yeah, it
Anyway.
happens.
Yeah, they were advertised as a god of good luck that would basically. Oh, 1908. I was off by a year.
We
But
take those. You take those.
I usually get within the decade, and I hope for just getting the right one within that. But anyway, it was a kind of doll that was manufactured and sold as a god of things as they ought to be, and supposed to kind of make all your worries go away and bring you good luck just by owning it.
Huh.
And it was supposed to bring you happiness because one advertisement says it's the cure for the blues and the grouch and a bunch of other things like melancholy. So
Huh.
just smile. It says dose one smile every 10 minutes because the doll's smiling. Just look at it and smile. It's a very weird looking thing and kind of horrific, if I'm being honest.
Incredible.
And Japan also got weirdly attached to it, as AC pointed out. It is now, I think, enshrined in Okinawa, I want to say. But yes, it is a product of rising American consumerism, and although not in the US part of a specific religious tradition, and there aren't any churches to this. Oh, AC corrected me, it's Osaka. Yeah, although it's not part of any specific religious tradition, it's a way that religion and consumerism were getting combined. Plus, a lot of the prosperity gospel comes out of that period as well.
Oh, that's
So
fair.
But I'd say that modern day America definitely has a bit more consumerism than just the way that things have been made more corporate.
Hooray.
Oh, and I missed the question a little while back. Would I count days you automatically get off towards civil religion like Sunday? Uh, Perhaps. It's definitely. I might just explicitly call that more religious than civil religious because it was kind of a result of like the blue laws, which you got the Sabbath off. And so I feel like that is just explicitly more religious, though it has become more civilly religious in recent years.
Interesting.
Yes.
So, yeah, holidays. Turns out they're a thing.
Yeah, definitely. There's always a shame with like holidays we've lost over the years because once things started to get more standardized as America became more connected, like a lot of immigrant holidays and ethnic holidays from different groups that came here kind of got phased out to be more American in air quotes around it. But
Yep. Sorry, I'm murdering someone with... Voila. Okay. Yeah, so why don't we cycle back now, having touched briefly on the fact that the event exists, and I don't think there's anything more interesting to say about it. It's just kind of there.
yeah,
Congratulations. Unless if you happen to notice anything interesting, it looks like it's mostly just, hey look, we're gathering presents.
yeah, I am. I don't know how like the religious faction in this server treats the event because there were, at least in the 17th century, a lot of like Puritans who were very unhappy with Christmas and Easter.
We can
And
talk to some of them to see if they actually say anything. I doubt
yeah.
that. I doubt they acknowledge its existence.
Okay, that's disappointing, but it is what it is.
Yep.
I can only hope for so much in from a
Exactly.
game's religion.
The problem, right? I think is that because the faction is playable, right? They don't want
Yeah.
to lock dialogue behind anything, and they also don't want to put people in that faction in a circumstance where they suddenly are like, I don't know, waiting to have to like click through dialogue in order to be able to access their quests.
Oh, true. Yeah,
So
I get that.
I don't know that they'll talk about it, but my instinct is that they won't.
As someone very quickly points out in the chat, the overwhelming impression they get from this game is it's overall uncreative. Yeah, I remember when you showed me the cemetery location a
Oh yeah,
while back.
we've got a whole bunch more of those since then, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Any improvements?
No,
Please,
more of the same.
I had a little bit of hope. Just,
Nope. We'll probably run past some of them because Brightwood here is just covered in, absolutely covered in. There you are. I'm trying to kill this guy. In like eldritch graveyard spaces.
Eldritch graveyard spaces, you say?
They're just eldritch in name only.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's just the space is literally called eldritch.
I was thinking of like Bloodborne and how the cemetery stones kind of become more eldritch as you go through that game. But yeah, nothing as stylistically cool as that, I assume.
Nope. Just that there's a fairly big monster that stands there, and that's about it.
Anyway,
Oh.
in this moment, I feel like it's a proper time to bring up my capstone.
Please do.
So, my capstone paper, which I'm currently editing because I need to remove 1,000 words to submit it to a publication, and cutting words is hard.
True.
But the overall topic was how sacred space is constructed in a cemetery environment, specifically with the rural cemetery movement. When I say rural cemetery, I assume most of you will think of it as something with like a cemetery out in the country. And that is not entirely accurate. I'll preface that and explain what I mean in a second, but other people have started referring to it as the garden movement, just for more clarity. But the rural cemetery movement was the movement to have a cemetery just outside the city limits to serve the urban community, because the churchyards in the city were becoming quickly overcrowded. There were health concerns about having all these decaying bodies within the city, because miasma theory was still a thing.
Sure.
And overall, they started moving to the countryside. At least was then the countryside. Most of the rural cemeteries have been overtaken by the city at this point. But it started in the 1830s, specifically 1831, with Mount Auburn in Massachusetts, which I really want to visit someday because I hear it's beautiful. But the landscaping and specifically making the landscape and naturalistic side of the cemetery stand out in making this beautiful landscape, which they believed would improve the moral quality of those who visited it.
Huh.
It was 19th century logic. I don't follow, but okay.
Sure.
But yeah, anyway, this specific movement was popular until the 1850s saw a new cemetery style come up, the lawn park style, which focused on having a single uninterrupted lawn, basically requiring flat gravestones. That didn't gain much popularity until like the turn of the century, though. So the rural cemetery was mostly a 19th century cemetery movement. And so how sacred space is constructed in that is a very fun religious studies topic that I had a blast with.
Yeah. I didn't expect you did. By the way.
Oh, yeah. And I, of course, was able to talk about civil religion because it also pops up in cemeteries.
What? No.
Especially
Who could have guessed?
Impossible. But especially after the Civil War, a lot of Civil War veterans there and generals started getting graves with civil symbols engraved on them rather than religious ones. I've read inscriptions that kind of denote a kind of alternative to the Christian afterlife, being more so a heavenly, like, military camp, more or less, which still fits well with the attitude of the time of death being kind of like an extended rest. General Hayes, for example, important Union general, his gravestone has an inscription about him resting in a camp after he's passed on. And so this kind of civil version of the afterlife and soldiers and emphasis on martyrdom, of course, is very religious, even though it's not explicitly so.
Yep. So is this kind of before or after you start seeing those like classic Puritan style like death, like skull head, death's head stones?
So those are before this period.
Okay.
They come around, let's see, the 17th, 18th century, mostly 18th.
Sure.
But the 18th century saw like a very melancholic view of death. Death was overwhelmingly kind of a sad and negative thing, and at least with the Puritans, a lot of the time they were like, okay, it's just a dead body. There's no soul here. You don't need to give it especially a ton of reverence, and so a lot of Puritan graveyards were not entirely the best kept up. And then they started including more death imagery into that, which is very cool. Love to see. Angels were a common occurrence, just kind of a little cherub with basically a baby face with two wings. And
that's horrible.
Yeah. But those were common in the 18th century. And then as you move into the 19th, the Romanticism movement kind of kicks off, emphasizing nature's beauty for one thing, and also death starts to get more romanticized. Like, rest in peace, although it's a term that has been used for a long time, starts appearing on a lot of gravestones around that time. Death as a kind of sleep comes up. A very important thanatologist who, his first name escapes me, but wait, let me just look up his main work.
I'm just gonna commit some murder. I'm gonna try and fill up our graveyards while you're looking up people.
Okay. Okay, so it's in his book, The Hour of Our Death, he a very important thanatologist brings up how he defines this period as the age of beautiful death, basically, where death has become romanticized, and as the 19th century moves on, like in England with Victoria, Queen Victoria's mourning her husband becomes a big thing and kind of the cult of death over there.
Interesting.
And in America, that a similar thing where death becomes very intimate, personal, and part of the family and just part of life comes up. This is reflected in hymns, gravestones, all over. And then as we move into the 20th century, a lot of the death stops happening in the home and more so in hospitals. And death slowly becomes a distant thing for a lot of families. And so death starts to become kind of feared again a little bit more, a little distant, and people want to kind of keep the ideas of death more at bay, especially with tying it back to consumerism a bit. You don't really want to think about your own mortality all that much, and you'd rather focus on comforts,
Sure.
worldly comforts. And so, of course, this has started to change again in the modern period. Death has kind of been starting to be reevaluated by a lot of modern Americans. But for the longest time, death was something that was minimized even in cemetery layouts. Like, like I said before, with the lawn park style requiring flat headstones, physically, the memory of these individuals and the memory of death was minimized. And eventually, as it gave way into memorial parks, where a lot of the focus was on statuary or different different kinds of flowers or plants.
Basically
And
anything
memorials
except
were,
the gravestone itself.
yes, everything except the gravestone itself. And so death really just kind of gets shoved aside. But then again, modern period, things are changing once more, and it's hard to explicitly say one way or another how things are going. But at least in the 70s, there was a big uptick in personalization of gravestones. You get some really wild ones after that time period. And so I'm really
Interesting.
lucky my study kind of cut off before then. My study went from 1840 till 1940, and
Okay.
so long period. But it did mean that I didn't have to deal with some of the more unusual symbols that came after, because one, that was a different style and not quite comparable to some of the other examples I was using,
Sure.
and it also meant that those gravestones viewed death in a different way than the people I was looking at.
Uh
And
huh.
so just they constructed sacred space in an entirely different way. And also it would have meant a lot more work for me.
That's
So
fair.
I'd love to
Uh,
study that someday, but just it's not not for right now.
that's reasonable. Hmm.
Oh yeah, military cemeteries with hundreds of thousands of identical stones. That is a big part, in my opinion, in building that civil space, because it lacks any kind of religious symbols, but it's very uniform and military-like. And while it's still creates a space of mourning and remembrance and gives you a real sense of scale of how many people are dead, it's not explicitly religious. And so, very cool. I've been reading about how overseas American cemeteries are viewed as American sacred spaces, even in like other countries. And so, very interesting.
Huh. That is extremely interesting. Should be good to salvage that. Sorry, I'm just doing some inventory stuff here.
All
Uh,
right.
Cause while I have a lot more carry weight, I don't have that much carry weight. Also, I got a stupid hat. I think the stupid hat is not good. Yeah, it's not good, but we're gonna wear it anyway because it looks
Perfect.
bad.
Gotta go for the style or lack of style. Both
Exactly.
works.
It is important. Is this any good? That is a look. These sure are looks.
It was mentioned in the chat that identical cemetery stones creep them out. Yeah, that's in part why, one, there's been a recent personalization of gravestones which better reflect the memory of the deceased, and also why in older gravestones, one reason why sometimes they have very comforting images and or very comforting inscriptions, like describing death as sleep. It's trying to make this concept of death more comfortable and the space more accessible to people, because these spaces were also used as green space and parks and meeting areas. Of course, there were regulations around like when you could be in them and what you could do. Like, I remember reading different cemetery documents about, oh, you can't drive your car through here whenever it was like 1911 or something like that. 1914 maybe? It was in that decade. And they were like, cars were new, and so they had to start thinking of regulations for them and what was acceptable in that space, which leads into the construction of sacred space as well, because regulating what you can and can't do in an environment to maintain a respectful atmosphere is important.
Yeah. That sounds like it's an understatement.
Yes.
Do. Salvage that one. Salvage that one, and then we should be
Also, I completely agree
about
with
able
the
to hit
chat
the road
here.
again.
I agree with the chat here. If the Undertaker says, if I ever get rich, I think I'm just going to enroll in various courses and spend years studying random subjects, not really pursuing degrees. That would be the life. I wish. I say I wish, even though I'm in a dual degree track, doing 2 degrees at once in entirely different subjects. But random subjects are great. Love it.
Exactly. That's one of the things I enjoy about doing this so much, is just that I get to kind of do whatever, and get to have interesting conversations with topics I know only a little bit about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love to get many people's different opinions on things and their different backgrounds and approaches. It's wonderful.
Exactly. And yes, AC, they are in fact just here for the event. Why did someone make the Toyota logo? I got nothing.
The mysteries of MMOs.
I mean,
So
I
do
couldn't
say,
tell if that was a player done thing or a developer done thing. Oh my god. The green.
that is fancy. I will also comment, I wish it snowed quite like this normally, because at least where I am, we haven't been getting a lot of snow because global warming.
Neither have we. Hooray.
So wonderful.
God, this outfit is terrible. I love it. Who thought this was a good idea?
It's perfect. I see no problems with this whatsoever.
Like, I don't even know what they're going for with it. Did they decide that the Rocket Man was a documentary?
Like, the helmet honestly looks like you're about to just charge someone with the point on the top.
Exactly. I got something there. What did I actually... I got another thing. Okay. Another thing I'm gonna immediately get rid of. That's alright. Could I even see from those eyes? I don't think so.
Not very well.
I could see directly in front of me, and that's about it. Though, I don't know, at least it's more practical than whatever this guy's wearing. I'm just gonna buy myself some food because I am way too lazy to actually cook food. I'm just saying. Like, I could buy food, or I could make food, or I could just, like, you've got 100? Neat. I'm gonna buy 77 of them.
I mean, it's very convenient.
Exactly. I can
And
spare
so
the 8 gold to do that.
The new world fast food industry was born.
Exactly. Anyway, while we're in town here, this is a great time to talk about the factions. Looks like right now, the Marauders are actually kind of owning right now.
Marauders are just the violence people, right?
Correct. Why?
Okay.
Why do other things when you can just do violence?
Solid.
Yep,
Why have complex factions when you can have one defining trait?
exactly. And so we have the Marauders. Where is actually the quest giver for them? They're somewhere around here. I think
Are
this
there
is
members
the.
of each faction in all the areas, or is
There
it
are.
just
Yep, there are.
okay?
Uh, because these guys control the settlement wars. Uh, so there's someone somewhere. I'll find them. I can only see where the syndicate one is because that's what I'm part of.
Oh, okay.
So I know
Gotcha.
the syndicate one's standing over there. Here's the Marauder one. No, that's just the supply cart.
Syndicate is the no ethics.
Correct.
Right? Okay, just trying to make sure I have them all straight.
Yep.
But
The quest to know and understand is our shared duty. How may I service you, fellow Eldite?
now let's just ignore how in the real world all research is very strictly regulated and
No.
ethics is very important to most people's experience in research.
So much rushing about trying to learn everything. Such a pointless waste when all we need is belief in the spark. Beatrice Rose, Covenant Templar.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. So this, the Covenant is always, I think, inside this church. In
Okay.
every town. Let's back up, get a good look at it.
Covered in scaffolding.
Covenant
Good.
scaffolding for the Winter Festival.
Gotcha.
But not normally like that. But otherwise, it is the one church in the game.
Yeah, it strikes me as very Protestant.
Uh-huh. Do you
That's-
want to elaborate on how and in what way?
Oh, just the big steeple and the pews, I guess, at least in older Catholic and Orthodox churches, they didn't have pews, but of course,
Mhm.
things change. And so it could just be vaguely Christian, but overall, the architecture, lack of a. Assuming this is pre-Vatican II, the altar space should be at least a lot more ornate and actually have a big altar.
Yup.
Plus, no tabernacle in what? Well, I should not compare it to explicitly Christian rituals with tabernacles, but no tabernacle makes me think that. Plus, just a simple table and pulpit. Yeah, that's the word. I don't know why that took me so long. Simple table and pulpit there just really reminds me of just a Presbyterian church or some kind of other Protestant church, because the use of communion tables rather than altars was a big sticking point for several denominations.
They seem to have put a thing so I can't actually get on top of the church easily.
Aw, that's sad.
The scaffolding really strongly suggests I should be able to, but...
Yeah, if they're gonna have scaffolding there, might as well make it usable.
Exactly. Oh, darn it, I haven't even been to that landmark. Fine, we're gonna go running this direction. Is it actually gonna tell me where that is? No. Pin that objective. Thank you. And then that'll get me over to the Winter Village for the next part there. But yeah, the Marauders are somewhere. Syndicate's outside just messing with the church. I don't know where the Marauders person is. Don't really care because they're just all about punch people hard.
Yeah, not a lot of nuance in any of these, but
Not the most nuanced in the world.
I am really sick of the science versus religion.
I'm
like,
super sick of
motif
it.
in every piece of media nowadays.
Uh-huh.
Like they took the whole debate of fundamentalist versus scientific education in the early 20th century and just expanded it to all times and places.
Is
Like,
that what it is?
yeah, it's think of like William Jennings
Of course.
Bryan in the Scopes Monkey trial.
Yeah.
That is basically what they're rooting it in, because throughout Christian history, a lot of times it wasn't science versus religion, and it was really just the end of the 19th century and early 20th century that, at least with the German schools of biblical criticism and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, that you started to see a conflict emerge, and
Mm-hmm.
that just stuck in modern perceptions of religion as contrary to science, even though there were many vocal preachers who were on the side of like science education and things like that. There were
Yeah.
still plenty who were against it.
Exactly. Because, right, a lot of people I'm sure would point out, oh, but what about, like, oh, Galileo or so-and-so, whoever. Early modern censorship. But, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that the idea that that the censorship was based on scientific belief rather than just, we don't like the Protestants, is actually emerges at around the same time as the monkey trial, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. It's basically that. There are earlier examples like what's his name, Horace Bushnell, who were very early and quick to deny Darwinism, at least in America. But the Scopes monkey trial, although if I'm remembering right, the fundamentalist side won out in that legal case, but it was kind of showed the American public, oh, look at these kind of backwards people, that they're kind of against scientific progress and advancement in education. It set things up to be, oh, religion is against education and learning, when that is really not the case.
Yep.
In so many ways. So many like early American universities were founded by Protestants in some sense.
I mean,
Most of the
my
ones
alma
in New
mater
England.
was, like, at least partially sponsored by Rockefeller.
Oh yeah, Rockefeller, big Baptist, right?
Yeah.
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 Okay, yeah. He gave so much money to different
gave-
schools and churches and missionary organizations.
Yeah, he did.
But like Harvard, Yale, all the big fancy ones in New England, pretty much all started as seminaries.
Yep.
So it's just not accurate in any sense, but it's accurate enough to the popular conceptions of what religion is about and what it's against. So, I mean, fundamentalist groups are still around. That is still the case in America in many situations, but it's just not something you can universalize across time and space.
Yep. And yet, sadly, here we are. Right. The fun one is that this division, right, these factions, actually persist even in Ebonscale Reach, the one otherwise very generically Chinese of indeterminate time area actually still has a covenant something or other. I don't even know what name to properly call him, because a covenant NPC representative,
Okay.
who of course wears like I think last week I identified it as Taoist without a whole lot of evidence to indicate that one way or the other, but
Oh, so the game doesn't really have religious diversity either.
no, not even slightly. Heck, I don't even think the game has religious presence. Because,
Yeah.
right, is the Covenant in any, I mean, from your perception, and is it in any meaningful way religious? Right, pretty much all they do is
Depends.
talk about the spark.
Yeah, it depends. Although there are definitions that focus more about social groups and things like that, which I guess the Covenant fulfills by being a player faction that the player can join and they're united in their religious faith.
I
I
suppose.
am not entirely convinced by those, and I consider the religious practice to be very important. And I feel that if they aren't actually practicing something, or at least having some kind of, I don't know, it's hard to quite put into words, but if they're not having a kind of action as a result of their belief, it's a little iffy to say that there's a religious presence in the game if they just kind of stand there saying vague things about a religion without actually theologizing or actually worship in any sense. Of course, worship's not entirely necessary. There are atheistic religions, but if there's no accompanying lifestyle changes or practices, for lack of a better word, I really don't see how the game really has too much religion.
That's fair. Because, right, one thing I've been trying to think about the last week or so is what makes the factions actually different, apart from one of them talks about rationality, and you'll see the NPCs, like, doing field work. One of them says the word Templar a few times too many. And the other one, I don't know. I don't even know what. Is pirates?
Do we ever actually see any NPCs worshipping or doing anything in the church besides stand there?
The Covenant's logistics, the central, like, head of the Covenant, who is, very dead and we may have murdered, is technically? He's in the church. He's standing there and then you fight him.
So, yeah, just standing around in churches, I don't think counts as a religious presence in my mind. But
Sure. Aw.
of course, definitions of religion are tricky, and no one agrees. Even after getting a degree in it, no one agrees, and I'm not sure I could quickly, on the spot, come up with something without having, like, paragraphs of explanation. But it is difficult to define, but in this game, most things, at least from my perception of them, just seem like a shiny exterior and nothing of substance within it.
Yep. I would concur with that. There you are. That's you shooting at me. Okay. We're good. We're good. Cool. Another breastplate. Hi, friend. The friend seems to be having a dance party. Okay, there's another one of those. We're gonna grab this, and then there's a winter village nearby.
Nice.
I don't know, this is kind of the closest thing, right? Is you have these little shrines in the world which
Yeah, but
have a
is this
thing.
part of the Covenant's
No.
religion, or
No.
yeah, okay.
This is just something that has existed. It seems to be, I think, of ancient construction. So since time
it
immemorial.
reminds me of like the monolithic structures from before.
Exactly. But there are at least something that resembles signs of devotion.
Yeah, the leaving different goods out for it.
A cornucopia?
Even though,
A literal cornucopia?
fun. Why?
Ah, it's Thanksgiving. Deal with it.
I don't know. I don't know if this is a fast travel system. I don't quite know why there's signs of people leaving things for it, unless they have a belief that that thing is sacred. So
Don't
I
know.
really just wish there was more substance to. Can you explain why? What is this part of religion? Is this not? Could you please, game, tell me something about it? But I don't think that ever happens.
No. I don't think it'll ever happen to either.
Yeah, like, you get grave goods in cemeteries because, obviously, sacred space and leaving things for the deceased. That makes sense. Leaving things at a shrine in an offering to some kind of, I was gonna say deity, but that's not always true. But I'll get too wrapped up in semantics. But some kind of divine figure.
Sure.
And so, unless that has some kind of connection to the divine or religious ritual practice, and that is some kind of ritual space, I don't know why there are offerings or if they would count as a religious thing.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, I would be kind of surprised if there wasn't some sort of, like, belief that emerged out of the thing that literally lets you teleport.
Yeah, I would definitely think that would be considered either religious or science, depending on how the game wants to take it. But
Exactly. Or both. Right.
or both. Religious science.
Or if you really gotta keep the stupid faction disagreement, right? One group is trying to understand them, one group is getting frustrated at that because you're, like, destroying the thing. Right, you're defiling the sacral space, and therefore you're gonna ruin it.
True.
Not
There is
necessarily a
nothing more
historically
classic
accurate
than-
one, but at least the, like, present thing. Right, at least it ties into real ideas.
It does. And, I mean, there's nothing more classic than religious groups disagreeing about the nature of something.
Exactly.
Just, oh boy, so many religious disagreements.
Woohoo. Cool. I did get a new helmet, though. I think I want to throw that on because it looked even dumber. Yes!
This.
Yes!
Oh boy. Now you just straight up cannot see. I don't know what the purpose of those helmets is, but whatever looks cool.
Look, how else are you supposed to wear an abomination's face as a hat?
I suppose?
You're saying you don't want to do that? How dare you?
Fancy hats are fun though, so.
Oh, I have to go find chests out here? God dang it. I thought I was just killing things. Aw, this is gonna be more inconvenient. Well.
No, the chat is saying, praying to the fast travel system. I actually do have a podcast recommendation if people like horror podcasts. The Silk Verses has a bunch of, it has religion in it, of course. And they're like gods of electricity and things like that. And so people are literally praying that their cup of morning coffee turns out well. So
I love it. Oh, I love that.
It's an amazing premise. I love everything about it. It is wonderful. And so that just reminded me, that comment in the chat reminded me of it.
Great. I adore that. I don't know where I'm supposed to go to, like, get chests out here, though. I guess it's like this whole area.
Oh, Silk Versus. I'll put the name in the chat. Oh, this reminds me.
Yes.
Did you ever do that, like, immunization quest?
Oh, yes. Sort of.
How did that turn out?
They decided that there was something in the dirt. Just
Okay.
something. Not clear what, just very much something.
So something in the dirt helps keep them protected from...
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
That there was
I mean-
something different between dirt in corrupted areas and dirt in lost areas.
I'm gonna put on my microbiologist
Yes.
conspiracy theory cap and
Do it.
go off because the dirt microbiome, it's, well, not microbiome. Microbiome refers to like more microbes within a organism, but microbes in soil is wonderful and super cool. And actually, a lot of studies on new antibiotics come from trying to isolate new forms of soil bacteria
Ooh.
and what and basically what antibiotics they produce, because basically most of our antibiotics come from one microbe wanting to kill another. Like penicillin is a fungus wanting to kill bacteria.
Yeah.
And so bacteria make antibiotics to kill other bacteria all the time and inhibit their growth. And so, assuming that the corruption is a bacteria and not magic BS, there could be something in the soil
Okay.
that inhibits the growth of the bacteria.
I
But
do
that
know
is-
the corruption is probably magic BS, but the other things might not be.
Sad. I was really hoping, hey, maybe the game developers know something about antibiotic production.
Nah.
But yeah. Oh, someone said bacteria fistfight in the chat. Yes. Bacteria are tiny little beings that want to either kill everything around them or work with them. And I love microbiology. It's super cool. Oh, magic bacteria in the chat? Probably, I hope so. I like the idea of a magic microbe in the soil creating a anti-magic antibiotic of some sort.
I like that idea too.
I'm not certain about the straight-up spraying bacteria over their crops. Could be cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria are super cool and actually can be multicellular.
Ooh,
And,
that's exciting.
oh yeah, bacteria, contrary to popular belief, many can alternate between single-cell versus multicellular lifestyles. But cyanobacteria can form these long filaments that share a outer membrane. So they're all these single cells with inner membranes, and they have a single long outer membrane, and it's wonderful. They can differentiate into different kinds of cells. It's amazing. Love them.
Big fan of that. I think I got someone doing a similar, if not the same quest as me. Yeah, I think we're doing the same quest, so I need to just follow them around until I get more chests.
It looks like they have the same idea. Looks like they're following you for a bit, but
I think we're mostly just doing the same thing. Because we
Solid.
need to just loot chests, which is annoying when you can't figure out where the frick the chests are.
oh, and
Oh.
in the chat, yes, bacteria absolutely physically change the dirt. Bacteria have changed a lot in the earth. Like when they first kind of helped kick off the oxygen atmosphere that we have, because
Big fan of that.
Once bacteria got photosystem 2, it was all over, and they were actually able to they're actually able to start producing oxygen gas, and also that had impacts on the amount of ferrous iron around, and so it's lovely.
Boo.
Oh, in the chat, they
Uh-huh.
sorry for going off on
No,
microbiology for so long.
please
know this
do.
is
I am
very far
I
from
am
history.
doing not terribly exciting stuff right now, and that is
So-
relevant to world building.
So, in the chat, they said, I didn't know they could have one long extracellular membrane. I thought, though I wouldn't be surprised at this point. So, cyanobacteria are gram-negative, which means that gram-negative bacteria refers to a kind of cell wall structure where they have an inner membrane, they have a peptidoglycan layer, which is a kind of carbohydrate shell, more or less. Well, not really shell, that's something else, but they have it's a kind of a carbohydrate protective layer. And
Sure.
then they have gram-negative ones have another layer of membrane on top of that, though gram-positive do not. Cyanobacteria are gram-negative, and so they have that inner layer, peptidoglycan, and outer layer. What cyanobacteria specifically do is they can kind of merge their outer membranes and share that kind of inner space where the peptidoglycan is, and they can just pump things into that and take things out. And so they can just kind of form these long filaments and communicate it through that. It's really cool.
That is extremely cool. Perfect. There's a fourth thing. Also, combat in this game, with other players, works somewhat better, and is less terrifying.
Nice. Who would have guessed that multiplayer
What?
gameplay in a MMO could be more enjoyable.
That's nonsense. Who could have predicted that? No one could have. That's who. Anyway, so we finished off this thing. We got a dumb hat. We killed some people. Now let's actually head off and see what this winter village is all about.
Nice. Is this specifically for the new event?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay.
Let's see if they
I'm
have
excited to
anything.
see how Christmassy it is.
Exactly. Hello. Oh no, apparently there's a master blacksmith that has been corrupted. Oh great, we could get an adventurer's helm, which looks like some cross between a gladiatorial helmet and a Morian.
Perfect. More helmets. Just hoard all the
More.
helmets at this point.
Exactly. Or we can not do that, and can instead take a look at that random patch of snow. I love how video games do this, by the way. Right,
It's so
their
out of
idea
place.
to do environment is to just add a snowy area. Just casual like. Right there. Do it.
You know,
Boom.
for how big and beautiful this game is, all the environments really feel modular and disconnected from each other.
Yeah, they do. Scratch that. They sound all super modular and disconnected, but also exactly similar enough that you can't tell them apart. Well, we nailed it. Oh. Oh, the Yeti's... Santa is a Yeti.
Ah, that is
That's new.
interesting. I feel like it kind of is a mix between Krampus and Santa, maybe, because at least
Yeah.
the horns.
Yep. Yep. Forever winter comes, bitter cold, must stop it, need help. You help? Winter cold, darkness, mind filled with dark mists, words hard. Holiday hut will help. Okay. Neat. Bountiful gift sack. Let's see if you gave us anything.
Let's see what Amazon has delivered to us today.
A beautifully wrapped present, which has some tokens inside. Silver ingot. It has a single silver ingot in it.
Thank you, Jeff Bezos, for this
Praise.
present.
Praise be. Oh boy. What else did we get? We got something else dumb. What was it? I'm trying to remember what all the dumb things we pick up are, so we can actually all appreciate them together. Oh right, this defiled breastplate. Well, that looks like it matches the other set. That's no fun.
Yeah. Gotta make it super clashing.
Oh, these all match. Boo. Boo. That's alright, we'll stick with the other thing for now.
Nice.
Okay, what's next? What's next? Because we've talked, I don't know, we've kind of already had a pretty wide-ranging idea. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's just a whole lot that we can actually say about any of... Ooh. Kind of that. I don't know that there's a whole lot to say about any of the religions because there's so little present.
Yeah, that's the disappointing thing. Just although they are in name there really isn't much to differentiate it from other, I don't know, just other factions or other groups. There's no religious diversity to talk about. There's no practices. There's not really hymns or prayers to analyze in depth in any kind of sense.
Exactly. It's just a lot of vague talking about the spark. Though, I did remember I was supposed to do something down... Here it is. Since we're in the area, let's go take a look at the Templar. We're only like a
Nice.
half a kilometer away. That won't take long.
And there's not even all that much material religion either. Like,
No.
the big emphasis of my last semester was material religion, and since so much of religious studies has been traditionally analyzed text and textual sources,
Sure.
basically, how can we get away from that and look at a more holistic view of religion and its material artifacts and all the aspects involved with that? This can include like someone's body and someone's senses and just the objects they interact with, the places they're at, and hence my project on sacred space and cemeteries. But it's just this game doesn't really have much of that because it all uses kind of the same church.
It does.
And are all the churches just copy and pasted?
I think so. If there's any that are different so far, it's the one we're running to off in the distance right now.
Okay.
But I don't think that's different.
I will hold out a little bit of hope.
Don't do that.
I know it's a bad idea, but I will always hope. But yeah, material religion, super cool, super trendy right now in religious studies, if any of you are starting to get into this field.
That seems to be true in a lot of fields right now.
True.
Right? Finally going, hey, wait, we should talk to the archaeologists.
Yeah. And even when it's not entirely archaeologists, it is just, hey, maybe we should actually consider all the stuff they've been actually making as a result of their religious beliefs, or things they've been making that have informed their religious beliefs, because stained glass windows communicate a certain message, and the people who grew up with those will have those beliefs about the church, or how they interpret it.
Yep. Because, right,
Like
those have
the-
obviously been studied individually for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
but not
Gotta
bringing
link
that
it
into
all
a
together.
specifically religious studies sphere.
Yeah, there's so much like art history out there on like material religious things. Of course, material religion extends far beyond just art, and art in the classical sense. But oh, this is spooky.
It is. It's also a
But,
graveyard.
Art history has done so much good work on it, and I'm really glad religious studies has started to take notice and incorporate that into some of our approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Because while religious studies is super interdisciplinary and doesn't really have a unified approach, it has some really cool theory behind it that I think can really add to the conversation.
Oh,
around these
absolutely.
pieces.
So,
Also, yeah,
this
the
is
chat's
the same
pointing out-
church, but there is a different graveyard around it.
The chat is pointing out anointed ghost as the name of that, and yeah, I also have questions about what anointed means, but
In this game, nothing. It means exactly as much as Eldritch does.
wonderful.
But, Graves?
Hey, yeah, I'm looking at the graves. At least that kind of sarcophagus-looking one is different than the other tablet-style graves.
True, true.
Because can't recall that one being in the last place.
All the rest of these have been, though, and are causing a very painful strobe effect, so we're going to run away from the green lights, because the green lights, hopefully that is not coming through on screen, but or on stream, because if it is, I am deeply, deeply sorry. I do not want to be giving anyone a epileptic seizure, I promise.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the head of the Templars, dude named General Carvalho. Sorry, not the lead of the Templars, the lead of the Covenant is a Templar who is now corrupted, named General Carvalho.
You know, not an actual like ecclesiastical authority, a Templar.
Yes.
Using the title general, not even like an ecclesiastical authority masquerading as a general, because ecclesiastical authorities can have armies and things like that. But his armor just very underwhelming in my opinion, because it could have related to his faction a bit more, but it's just vaguely evil and red.
It is extremely vaguely evil and red. Also, he's using a weapon that doesn't exist in the game. Greatswords are not usable weapons. They're working on implementing them.
That just makes me jealous. Why can't I have that?
Exactly.
Also, is this supposed to be a church?
Yes.
There is.
This is also was being used as a fortification because they got pushed back by Lost. So all just outside the graveyard are Lost, like over there, the Lost Impaler who has or the dude with a coffin on his back,
Okay.
the Lost Gravedigger, and then there are corrupted inside. So General Carvalho, uh, made a pact with the corrupted, basically, sacrificed himself to it in an attempt to drive back the Lost. I sacrificed all the other Covenant with him, i.e., all these Templars.
Okay. Inside, I really didn't see any signs of like ritual space within there either.
Nope. Nope, I don't see anything either. I see the banners.
Oh yeah, AC does
And
point
that's
out
it.
about the Salvation Army and their ranks. Yes, but the Salvation Army is like solidly mid to end of the 19th century. It would be out of place anyway. And also, the Salvation Army is special. I love studying them, but they're not to be taken as like religious ranks equal soldier ranks.
And then there's these guys. By the way, I happen to know, right, in addition to your work on graveyards in, like, actual real life, you were working
Yes.
on a project on graveyards in video games.
I did. I've written and submitted a paper. Still, I submitted it to First Person Scholar, and they have told me, one, that they're restructuring, and also that they're short on editors right now, so they haven't gotten back to me with edits. But yeah, I was working on a paper about how cemeteries and gravestones, and just mostly cemeteries, play a role in video games and the game world, and just what kind of purposes they serve in a variety of different games. Because in some games they are very clear cut with, okay, this is kind of more or less a monument to your failures. Characters that you don't save will show up here, or or sometimes you'll be shown a graveyard if you die. I'm mostly leaning on the side of characters you don't save show up here.
Yeah.
A example being
Darkest Dungeon.
Darkest Dungeon, yes. All your characters who die end up in the graveyard, and it's basically a monument to, hey, you couldn't save them. But more importantly, and more interestingly, it is a kind of memory creation, because it memorializes those who you've lost. And that actually shows up in a lot more games, because the primary role of cemeteries is creation of both social memory and preserving the memory of the deceased.
You're saying the
And so-
primary role of graveyards is not to give people things to wear? Oh no,
yeah,
sounds fake.
Totally not. Graveyards totally aren't just places you can rob and take resources from and all that.
Sounds
But,
fake.
Tons of people have done more and better work than me on grave robbing, and so I didn't touch on it much in my paper. But how different cemeteries bring up that kind of memory is really interesting, because sometimes it can be done in a way that actually helps the player come to terms with, oh, they are past, but now I have this memory of them. I'll bring up Darkest Dungeon because I love that game,
Reasonable.
but they happen to like change the style of the headstone depending on the level of the character that you've lost.
Uh-huh.
And so as a result, you really get as a result, like, how much time you've invested in it really translates to kind of, once that character is dead, how much investment there is in the gravestone. Like, higher levels get more ornate gravestones, and it will have an inscription about how they died, and so that creates a memory in the player of that moment. And of course, gravestones and cemeteries also denote hostile locations, like we just saw, because in a modern American, more recent American, I should say, because, like I said at the beginning, attitudes towards death are changing. But when cemeteries were more viewed as signs of death, and death is scary, and something should be separate, that's not new, but it's playing on modern American on discomfort with death, and the physical reminder of death helps indicate a hostile location, and
Cool.
more or less prepares a player for experiencing some kind of enemy where they could die, because it's like physically showing, hey, death is a thing, and reminding them of that before giving them a threat to their own life, even though death in video games is more or less meaningless.
Yep. Did you talk at all about something like, I don't know, Terraria, or to a lesser extent, Minecraft, where when it's literally player death leaves gravestones, and so you might get like
Yeah.
user-generated graveyards?
I didn't touch on that. I did games I've touched on because I pulled it up now because I wrote this little, like, not too long ago, but enough that I need to refresh
Of
myself
course.
on which games I entirely used. I used Darkest Dungeon, Stardew Valley, because Stardew Valley has a cemetery in it.
Yep.
Bloodborne, Pokemon Red, Fire Red, and oh yes, City Skyline, because City Skyline operates as just the very basic function of cemetery as amenity to like dispose of dead bodies. Very boring. I just touched on it for that
Yeah.
purpose. But you bringing up Terraria is a pretty good example, because if there's enough gravestones in one area, it becomes a I think it's either called a cemetery or a graveyard sub-biome,
Okay.
where hostile mobs can spawn like throughout the day even.
Oh,
It's
that's
really
wild.
yeah, and so they do, on one hand, yes, create a memory of in the player of, hey, I died, this is why I died, and it's creating a physical marker of it, which plays into that role, as well as leading into preparing the player for something hostile, because it's like the gravestone drops exactly where the player died, and or sometimes it bounces around a little bit, but it drops roughly where the player died, and so that indicates danger. Like,
Shocking.
you died there last time, there was something there that killed you, either a bomb blew up, or a monster got you, or you fell into lava or something. Any number of causes. It indicates danger in that sense. And so, again, is a reminder of mortality in a deathless environment, which made for a very nice title, because I titled it Cemeteries in Video Games, Spaces of Mortality in a Deathless Environment.
Amazing.
But yeah,
A good title.
I did remember you were a little confused at Stardew Valley. It has a small graveyard in the center of town,
Okay.
and it's very easily overlooked, but in some of the character interactions in reading the inscriptions, it does contribute to a sense of world building in a way, because it does show, first of all, that the town has history that's more than just the people you see nowadays. It shows a little bit more depth to that, as well as Abigail comes to the cemetery occasionally and sits at one of the graves, and so that really shows a connection to the dead, between the dead and the living. It's also in the center of town rather than towards the exterior, showing kind of certain attitudes towards death, which is fun to talk about. So I had a blast writing about all the different ways.
Excellent.
And even in Pokemon with like Lavender Town, it has a Pokemon graveyard, and bringing up two kids that, hey, Pokemon die, and also that, oh, these trainers actually have a connection to the Pokemon, is kind of important, because, and shown in the graveyard, because you see trainers mourning their dead Pokemon, and it's just showing there's more to that relationship there than just owner and pet or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And also brings up to kids how to grieve, more or less, because a lot of people are not very good at grieving, especially in modern America, because death has been such a taboo subject for so many years that the process of grief and grief itself has not become very important. Or, well, it's not become very mainstream yet.
Yeah.
Again, modern conversations around death, especially changing views when it comes to the psychology of it, which I think Math actually did a very nice lecture of a while ago on grief and all that.
Yeah.
Changing views of psychology is important in actually helping people deal with that, because
Okay.
for the longest times wasn't great at it.
Cool. By the way, while we're at it, thank you Fashionably Late and Peak Adjust for the follows. If you don't know, I am a professional historian. I am the main person on the channel, even though Reed has been doing most of the talking today. So, welcome. We do, like, variety streams, all of historical games, talking about the history, how they're the design, and how those kind of interact. So, this series is interviewing people, that work with games and history in some way, in order to, see a little bit about the context behind New World, and see, potentially, what are some of the missed opportunities of this game. Because there are many.
Yes. Like the cemeteries here, honestly, I don't think they really serve the other purposes that video game cemeteries do. Because one, there is no amenity need for the cemeteries. No one dies on this island,
No.
or at least dies for long. There is no need in the very physical sense of I need to dispose corpses. None of the gravestones have names or designs on them beyond the basic outline, which I'm really disappointed about. They could have had some really cool Easter eggs, more or less, in there, but they didn't.
Yep.
And so it doesn't fulfill any of the role of creating or generating a kind of memory, or even social memory, if I'm being honest, because it is just straight up a stereotypical graveyard that you'd think of if Haunted Graveyard
Exactly.
came up.
I think that's unfortunately describes a lot of this game, right? The Covenant seems to be the first thought you have when you think of religion as an American.
Mm-hmm.
The Syndicate seems to be the first thought of, what's the most sciencey people. The graveyards are what's the first thought when you think of a graveyard.
Exactly. And it doesn't even fulfill the role of indicating danger, because you see the enemies long before you see like the details of the graveyard.
Yeah, you do.
I really like how in other games you enter a spooky environment, maybe like a graveyard, and then you get introduced to the enemies. It's kind of preparing you and setting you up for that.
Uh-huh.
Like in Bloodborne, you see a very gothic environment, and the enemies slowly get more grotesque and awful as time goes on.
Yep.
And it's very cool, wonderful, but yeah, and also BioShock Infinite, because we didn't have like supernatural enemies until the graveyard there.
Yeah.
And in BioShock Infinite, the graveyard kind of sets you up for, hey, there's something spooky going on, because like all the way back to like even Gothic literature and before Gothic literature, cemeteries have been kind of a climax of fears around death, anxiety, and all that. So it's, I don't know, I feel like even there, the graveyards in New World fail, because they don't even fulfill that basic role.
Exactly. By the way, I realize we're gonna need to try and hit level 2 for the quest ASAP, because there are two. I mean, apart from the whole list of stuff, right? We can't actually see these particularly. But you were talking about it being Christmas with the stuff filed off. The three types of things are floral, holly, and oak.
Oh.
For the different ones here, the different armors. They're all floral, holly, and oak. And you're the regent of each of these things.
Ah, neat.
Yeah, but also, it's totally Christmas. You have eggnog, and fruitcake, and ginger snaps.
Oh, ginger snaps. I love ginger snaps. I have such a good ginger snap recipe that I need to make soon. If anyone knows me, I love making desserts, especially ones with a lot of ginger and cinnamon in them.
Perfect.
So, perfect for this time of year.
Exactly. I just made gingerbread today.
Oh, good. I have been slowly trying to improve on my gingerbread making skills.
Oh, I used a box kit. I am way too lazy to make one. I am not a good enough. Oh. Hello. I am not a good enough baker, nor did I have time to try and do one by scratch.
Oh, I may not be the best baker, but I certainly try from scratch.
Yeah.
There's this one Victorian cookbook. For those who don't know, my love of the 19th century also extends to 19th century
Incredible.
cookbook, but that's not in any academic sense. It's just hobby. So
Yeah.
I've been trying to recreate this one, and it's given me so much trouble with temperatures and cook times because they don't specify.
Of course they
And
don't,
so-
because you would just be told it.
Yeah, it would be too easy if, they actually listed how much flour I should put in rather than
Enough.
saying do this until it's roughly this consistency. It's like, thank you. Now I end up with somewhat dry gingerbread because I ended up adding too much. But before I go off on that tangent, and I probably won't go off on that, there are questions in the chat.
There are plenty
What's
of...
your favorite communal morning practice? That's a fun one.
That is a fun one.
They said they like Irish wakes, and those are nice. Those are definitely nice. I don't know. Something about generally, because I'm American, of course. I really like just funeral homes and having the deceased there and being able to talk to others about their memories of them.
Okay.
To me, that's important, though. Of course, there are plenty of people who go to those and they just more or less stand around, and it's not generally helpful to actual remembrance of a person, because the social death does not equal physical death, and vice versa. Someone may be physically dead, but they're still socially important, and that's pretty big. And so, kind of processing that disconnect, I think, is important for situations like those. Do you have a favorite communal morning practice?
I'll be honest, being also American, I am of course a fan of the Louisiana wakes,
Oh, those are so good.
because those are just fun, right?
Yeah,
They're one of the few practices in the United States that make having died into something that is, in a meaningful way, a chance for the living to still have fun,
yeah.
which
It's,
is just not something
very
you
much
see a lot.
celebration. Yeah,
Exactly. Right, is that
And-
grief and joy are not two mutually exclusive concepts,
hmm
and it seems
Absolutely agree.
very much the case that they are kind of the only one of very, very few in the US that actually recognize that. And that's neat.
Yeah. Oh, and also, someone highlighted the message, so I feel bad about not getting it till now, but
Raptor
or
saying-
at least not commenting on it till now. But any thoughts on cemeteries in Dark Souls, since
Ooh.
they exist, but there is also the undead curse and the societal implications of that / dealing with that is kind of explored.
Yeah.
I honestly, I haven't played any of the Dark Souls games, and I've been meaning to. I just have been super busy, and also my potato of a computer, which is why, again, I don't have a camera on right now, is not great at running things. So I'm hoping to try and get into those soonish. But the
In the
Cemeteries of
meantime,
Dark,
I can actually talk about them because I do
Yes.
have thoughts.
you can do that.
Exactly. So the thing that's interesting about Dark Souls is that unlike this game, there is such a thing as permanent death, right? The undead curse does exist, but at the same time, people still die. Right? You can go hollow, and when you die after going hollow, you are just dead.
Ah, okay.
Right? The hollows sometimes come back, but right, every NPC after they go hollow still is just dead. They don't universally die, but right, you don't kill Solaire over and over and over and over again. He's just dead. Well, Solaire's the bad example because he doesn't actually go hollow. But Sigmire doesn't keep coming back in Ash Lake. It's just gone. And so there is a sort of permanent death. But the graveyards overall are still very much an aesthetic thing. Because it just changes what enemy type, right? Wherever you are, it's just like, okay, now instead of enemies with flesh on them, you are now facing skeletons.
Ah, gotcha.
Right.
I do think it's a little
And
boring
that's
about
pretty much the only change,
that.
because the undead graveyard is... I mean, there's like the whole catacombs, which leads down to the Tomb of the Giants. So it does have like a whole series of areas, but it's pretty much just defined
cool.
by their undead skeletons instead of undead other thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or instead of, I guess, hollows, which are like sentient hamburger. They're just skeletons. So it's just an aesthetic, right, determinant of who is where as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm. I do think it is a little boring about how so many games just use tablet headstones rather than any of the other cool designs out there. Like, they don't ever bring up, unless they're modeled after a real cemetery, they don't ever bring up, like, Egyptian revival architecture or classical architecture. Like, urns with a piece of cloth draped over them, or, like, in stone, of course, but that design is a classical symbol of mourning. And like you don't get obelisks like you would in a like 19th century cemetery because the Egyptian revival style was in fashion that during that century.
Sure.
And so I think it is boring how they just limit themselves in that way to just little tablet headstones, nothing grand or big or unique. So that's just one side comment on it.
I think that's fair.
Okay, Raptorus asks, what would you guys say is your favorite use of cemeteries in a video game, not necessarily just historical ones? That's tricky.
That's a good question. Like, BioShock Infinite's actually, I think, it's pretty far up the list for me. Even though I don't love it. I don't love many things about that game. But the graveyard is actually pretty neat.
It is, because it also acts as a point to bring up a lot of darker themes within it, because the Lutesses,
I think.
They show up digging their own graves.
Yeah, they do.
And they talk about death, and it just introduces such a morbid element to it that I feel like BioShock Infinite uses their graveyards very effectively in that regard, because it also creates the memory of Lady Comstock. So they hit all my marks for like what a cemetery kind of does in a video game. It would probably be up there, either that or tied with the various, because there are also in Darkest Dungeon cemeteries within kind of the areas that you go see, like in the Weald, for example, is one area that you can go to. It's this forest of overgrown kind of mushrooms and wilderness, and there's several like sub areas of overgrown cemeteries, and within that, it's a sacred space that's been corrupted, and that imagery I feel is very apt for the overall theme of the game, along with just the other things I've listed before about the graveyard within the hamlet itself. But
true.
So it's probably BioShock Infinite, followed by a close second of Darkest Dungeon.
Exactly.
When it comes to like cemetery representation.
The other options, of course, would be Someone Threw Out Journey as another fabulous example.
Ooh,
And I always yes. Literally
Journey
every
is
time
always
yes.
good.
There's
Also, Austin Wintory's music is so good. Please listen to it if you haven't. He wrote the soundtrack for that
exactly.
game.
Right, and I mean the Pathless also seems to have cemeteries, which we've been playing a lot recently. And if we treat, there's some places where it's not clear whether a field of stones is actually a cemetery or whether it's just a field of stones with holes in them.
And that is where the other parts of like cemetery inscriptions and designs should come in.
Exactly.
Which was a main point of my paper with how, well, not with video game cemeteries, but with real-world cemeteries, how those images actually differentiate that space from just a field of stones.
Yeah. Because
So
there definitely are things
it
that...
would be really helpful to have that. But
Yes. But, right, the thing is, right, you can't even use is this space sacral or not, because literally every space in the Pathless is sacral. There is no such thing as a profane space in the Pathless.
well, that's where more
No,
modern
that's
definitions of
that's
sacred
not
space
quite
come in.
true. That's not quite true because
Okay.
anywhere that's literally on fire is profane.
Yeah.
But that's about it. That's just like
A
right
lot
around
of
the thing that has been corrupted.
Mhm.
Everywhere else is sacral, even when everyone's
Gotcha.
dead.
A lot of more recent scholarship on sacred space has moved away from the traditional.
From
Of course, it's
Eliados.
still traditional. Yeah, from the just sacred versus profane distinction, because, like you said, there are sometimes spaces that are like very hard to distinguish between that, and also just certain religious traditions that view like nature as sacred. Where is the profane in that? And so recent other revisions have kind of moved away from that, but it's still very important to, very foundational to our understanding of sacred space.
I think it's also one where scholarly understandings have moved away, but at the same time, scholarly understandings are not popular understandings. And so a
Exactly.
popular understanding can preserve a very clear dichotomy or deconstruct a very clear dichotomy without actually having reference to a particularly potent or rigorous scholarly apparatus around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that's true for a lot of games is that using theories that are 50 years old actually typically works better than using the most up-to-date theories
Because it does appeal to the wider audience. Yeah.
and it's what the game developers are aware of in the back of their heads.
Mm-hmm. Like when you think of sacred space, you think of it as opposed to just other kinds of space,
Exactly.
rather than thinking of levels of people's interaction, the emotions they're supposed to invoke, the ways that people I already said that interact with the space, but levels of sacredness too, because I recently, some of my work was doing a comparison to a Catholic cemetery, and there were ways that that sacred space was still further subdivided into other areas and kinds of sacred space, because the regular lay people's gravestones were all around, but up on this hill there were these rather tall obelisks or staffs, depending on the style, of gravestones, and so I went up to them to see why is there this clear divide between this kind of isolated space where the style is very different and they're up in this place of prominence, and it was all the graves of priests in the area, and even some bishops were there, and so their graves were set apart, and so there was a kind of there wasn't a clear demarcation, like there wasn't a fence dividing them, but there was a distinction between the kinds of space there versus the kind of space further down the hill with the graves of the laity. And there was kind of levels of sacredness there that you don't see with a clear sacred versus profane, because how is the sacred subdivided further? Because when I was talking about civil religion and more Protestant religion in cemeteries in the rural cemetery movement, sometimes those spaces mix, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're different, and there are different kinds of sacred space, and it all mixes together, and it's a wonderful mess, and I love it so much. I am very passionate about, but it goes beyond that simple dichotomy.
Exactly. Totally reasonable. And I think there are definitely games that do deconstruct that, but yeah, it turns out real world is messier than games.
Yes.
Surprising nobody. This should
Though
surprise
you
nobody.
mentioning the Pathless being mostly sacred space makes me curious about potential different kinds of the sacred in the Pathless.
Yeah.
That would be a cool paper.
There's
if
a
someone
lot
had
there.
time to write that.
I think there is plenty there to talk about. Wow. Look at
That's
that.
kind of stylish.
That is just full on. What if Heretiarius, but early modern? I mean, fair enough. Oh, look at that. Huge improvement.
Nice.
Huge improvement over my current weapon.
Oh, and AC brings up in the chat, there's Gravekeeper Simulator. I did not look at that game entirely for a few reasons. One, because I did not have it, and I did not want to spend the money. And also, from the playthroughs I've seen, it's a little unusual, because there are times where the player is actively discouraged to dispose of bodies in a nearby river rather than bury them. And there's a lot going on there, more than I could talk about in my very limited word count. So.
Oh no. I don't like that. What? There's supposed to be a quest right here.
Oh.
Game? Game, please. I want to see these. Left behind at the shrines across the territories. Runic histories. I wish to see these runic histories. There you are. Good lord. Though you took forever to spawn in. Toshi Harada. Okay. Senso no Ko. Well, at least we finally have non-European weapon rep.
Yeah. I was just about to comment, like, non-European name, non-European weapon. Good to see.
But also is a giant axe, so... Maybe don't get too excited about that.
AC's pointing out that, yes, the weapon's very odd.
Well, let's see if AC can find out why the weapon is odd, because I don't know Japanese. I have no particular intention of learning Japanese anytime soon, so I will leave it to others to delve into what makes that odd.
Exactly.
Goodbye.
The fortunate thing about studying American religion is that I usually don't have to learn another language. Though,
Exactly.
of course, I do need to learn other languages to keep up with scholarship and learn it, like different immigrant reports and things like that, but I can put it off for a tiny bit.
Exactly, and you need them for fairly limited purposes.
Yeah.
Unless if you're
English.
doing, like, you know, Latin American influences on American religion. Then you
East
probably
Asian immigration
Yeah.
would need that.
Yeah.
Though I have gone the boring route of mostly Protestant or Catholic things. Well, mostly Protestant or Catholic groups I've been investigating, and so
That's fair.
usually it's either Anglo-Catholicism, which is mostly using English, or some Latin, which I know enough of to get by, and most of it, just everything is in English.
Yeah. Makes that easy. So way out here, there is something.
Okay.
I think we'll try and get these 4 things, see if we can find the axe, and then call it a day. Just because I'm curious.
Sounds good to me.
See what these runic histories made by a Japanese executioner at these shrines. Little tiny actual shrines.
That is interesting to see. I feel like if this is really a shrine, then it's the first level of like religious diversity we've seen.
Yep. I will say,
not-
Ebonscale Reach does have elemental shrines, which is not good. Not a fan.
What are the elemental shrines like?
Aristotelian elements.
Oh, unusual choice, but fine.
Go away. Go away. Yup.
AC says Japanese executioners didn't use axes.
Yeah. Okay. But the name Kubakiri apparently just means executioner, which makes that fair enough. Sweet.
I guess
so,
that checks out then? Maybe?
uh,
A lot of question marks around it.
wow, so they're just all over here. Okay. That's not super helpful, but we'll try and get up top side
Solid.
relatively quickly, competently, somethingly.
Something that is interesting is with the expansion of Shinto, I'm thinking of like those little shrines. So of course they're not quite in the style of a Shinto shrine,
Yeah.
but it got me thinking about Shinto. And so with coming to America and the new kami here and the whole process of adapting that, I think is fascinating, and I need to read more scholarship on it.
Yes. But yeah, actually, while I'm thinking about it, let's actually quick slide over this way. Because there is, let's see, Ebonscale Reach way up here. Right, I've only found a couple of the things, but there is the Water Shrine.
Oh.
And there is the Air Shrine.
Are these
So as there may be
really,
it may
like,
be the
intricate
5L.
things?
No, they're just things in the world.
Oh.
They're right. They seem to be landmarks in Ebonscale Reach. So they may be going for like the 5 elements system. But
Yeah.
it strikes me as significant that the generically Chinese area is also the area where we end up with generic
With those.
everything else.
Yeah.
I need to get on top of these rocks. How do I actually...
It is a shame how generic everything is and everything feels.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I didn't think they had air either. I haven't looked it up because we will talk about Ebonscale Reach in detail later on another stream when Jeremy Salkel can come back.
Wonderful. I'm excited for that.
Exactly. And be able to talk about a whole bunch of things with someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So,
AC says it's earth, metal, wood, fire, and water.
so yeah, no, we're just going Aristotelian.
Yeah, which
So, hurrah.
boring. And also, yeah, not quite right.
Yeah, yeah.
Did the Ocarina of Time have elemental shrines?
Uh,
Can't remember.
yes and no. Right, they had
Yes
like
and no?
they had like water temple, fire temple,
Yeah.
etc. But then they also had like
That's one.
shadow temple and spirit temple and all those places.
Okay, so not quite.
Exactly. Right, they
I
have
was
like
trying
they
to
have
think
like
if maybe
6.
this
Yeah, no, this seems to just be like Aristotle.
same.
Uh-huh. And getting up here is going to be annoying. Oh, wow. It actually worked fairly easily. But I have to then... I'm trying to get on top of this rock to turn in a quest. But to get on top of the rock, I'm going to have to walk all the way around and then not fall off the rock. Because they made this too tall to easily climb.
Okay.
So the only way I've actually found to get up is to run around this way and just try and not miss.
That feels like a really janky way to get up there.
Doesn't it?
Perfect. Yeah.
Right, because if you miss this one, you just lose. I think. Yeah, that's too low. So yeah, you have to like try and get up.
This feels like the Skyrim method of
Yes,
trying to get up a mountain by repeatedly jumping.
it absolutely is. Luckily, I don't think carry weight affects jumping ability.
Nice.
So,
Carry weight is always something in games that I get from a practical sense, but always has not worked well with me because I have a tendency to hoard all the items.
Same. Big same. Ah, fine. I'll see if I can get around this way. Potentially. I might be able to get around this way. This is full Skyrim method.
Oh yeah. I'm surprised there's no like actual path out there.
Not that I found. It's like, here, climb. Maybe this one works. Maybe. And then, yeah, now I'm on top. Can work my way back over. It is
Nice.
crazy.
Yeah, that's a grueling process to get up there.
There's got to be a faster way, I just have not found it. But like... No. Don't know. We did it. We are gonna turn in the quest to an antiquarian. Or the main
Oh, wait,
reason
they
it's
used
worth...
the word antiquarian?
Yeah, they just straight up call her an antiquarian.
Ah, fun. Reminds me of all just the antiquarianism in the 19th and early 20th century.
Oh, of course they do.
Let me see.
But yeah, she's looking into the ancients.
Precisely the types of things I'm looking for. The ancients did not share our methods of construction at all. It's
Alright.
clear they were capable. The kind you
Uh-huh.
not clear, but probably some type of thralls who
Oh
served
boy.
the ancients. And Emerald
And then you want me to go over back to Amarine Temple again. We're not going to do that.
You know, they couldn't have set up in a more accessible place.
You think?
That seems very out of the way for anyone to reach them.
You think? Seems like it's someone who really doesn't want to be talked to, but also we're supposed to help them with their stuff.
Okay, but also kind of mood. I would like to just hole myself up in a library for the rest of my life and
That's-
be out of the way from people.
Fair. Big fair. So yeah, we're gonna go down here, and then up there. Oh wow, these are just super low level stuff. I just apparently never did them. Okay. Well, so be it.
Time to be over leveled for a little bit.
Exactly. Not my fault.
Of course not.
If they didn't want me to be over leveled, they should have level capped me. Final Fantasy XIV has fixed it. It's not my fault if they don't here.
True. That is very true. If other MMOs have found a way to do it, then it's kind of on them.
Exactly.
As most things are in how broken this game is.
The draw distance in this game is the one thing that is like super unacceptable.
I remember, yeah, just a moment ago seeing those towers pop into distance.
Yeah,
And the snow. It's like, that should have been visible a moment ago. But
it's real bad. NPCs are the worst for offenders on this. You have to be like within 50 feet of them for them to even show up. But look at the shadows, right? The shaders are also...
yeah, that's... yeah, the shadows just kind of coming into being there make very little sense.
It's not pleasant. Oh look, and someone's doing an ecological devastation. Speaking of which, in the religions you specialize in,
Yes.
let's talk in like environment and colonialism.
Ah, fun.
Correct.
Yes, that awful thing that, America has done in the past.
Uh-huh. But also,
So-
right, is there any sort of response to, since we're walking through an area where someone just deforested quite badly, is there a response to specifically environmental devastation at any point?
Very recently, yes. Very recently, a lot of, like, eco-theology or green theology. Green theology, I think, is the proper term, but some use, like, eco-theology, has emerged, and actually modern figures like Pope Francis, for example, have been getting increasingly better about talking about the climate change and how we need to be custodians of the environment. They draw upon usually Genesis, and a lot of Christians draw upon Genesis and believe that God gave them a role as custodians of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so those green theologians have started to incorporate that into kind of a religious response and protest against major corporations who pollute the environment. And I think one major step, is it's called the Green Bible. It's like a red letter Bible, but all the text about the environment in the Bible is colored green, which very cool. I have seen one of those, but I don't own one. And so that's like on the ecological protection side of things. Of course, Christianity has quite a long history with colonialism and destroying the environment as well. There's a really cool book that's on my to-read list that, let me actually bring up the quote from this one review. But it's called Anointed with Oil, How Christianity and Crude Made Modern America. And
Okay.
basically talks about how American Christianity and the crude oil industry are kind of inseparable, because a lot of the early oil men were very Christian and saw it as basically, well, finding oil was kind of the feat in and of itself. And
Of course.
how basically finding oil was kind of up to God in some ways, and their fortune was also decided by God because they were specifically blessed for some reason. At least that's their justification for it. And so a lot of people, like you mentioned, with like big businessmen, were able to then fund American Christian churches and missions and things like that. And
Yeah.
so it becomes inseparable.
Sure. I mean, Carnegie and Rockefeller
Yeah.
are kind of foundational figures.
Carnegie's religiosity is always weird. He's in name Presbyterian, but I don't think, if I'm remembering right, he wasn't like super religious, but at the same time, his Gospel of Wealth is taught in all the AP US history courses and also is a theological work in and of itself.
Exactly.
And so he was religious in a sense and did incorporate that into his business practices.
I mean, like the founders, I think it's fair to say that he is not necessarily corresponding to any particular or particularly potent sect of a religion, and that is a
Yeah.
very different thing from not having belief be foundational.
It's definitely vaguely Protestant. It's
Exactly.
It's not super rooted in like a Presbyterian background, though there are of course influences of that. It is more universalized than one specific tradition.
And by the way, one bad gem, thank you for the follow a couple minutes ago. Welcome, say hello. Can we all get a wave in the chat? The Grand Chicken Lord. Sort of related, on Twitter someone posted writings of Martin Luther chastising people who didn't protect themselves against disease. Talks about it not like protecting the body that God gave you. It's sort of akin to a suicide. Hooray, Protestantism.
Martin Luther, way back in the 1500s, he wrote about whether one may flee from the plague. I think that's the name of the treatise. I've read it a few times at this point because it's super cool seeing how religious figures talk about disease. But he talked about how, yes, if you can, like, help your neighbor out, if you are safe enough, like, help others who are sick and trying to give them care. Otherwise, you should get out of Dodge pretty much and not put yourself recklessly in harm's way. It's a very interesting perspective, and I do recommend it if people are interested in, like, around the Reformation and their views of disease. And it still continues to have an impact on modern conceptions because at least when the COVID-19 pandemic started, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, a mainline Lutheran church, even though evangelicals in the name, it's they quoted from it a lot at the start,
Yeah.
and so his theology and his writing continues to influence modern day ways that they react to religion, not religion, how they react to disease, and so it's very cool.
Absolutely. It's a shame that
Yeah,
you
you
know
doubt it
it's
would work, but-
Luther and there's
yeah.
all the rest of Luther, but meh,
Yeah, there's
so be it.
Luther, him going super anti-Semitic, especially towards the end of his life, and also getting violently anti-Catholic.
Yeah. Yep. I'm glad Lutheranism has, for the most part, chilled a bit.
Yeah,
I mean, like, honestly, when you think about, like, the big Protestant denominations that do stuff, Lutherans, like, don't even make the list.
yeah, Lutherans fly
like
pretty under the radar in comparison.
Exactly.
I think in part because they're kind of more high church, and also generally in America they're a lot smaller compared to other denominations.
That's fair.
Like the Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, they're like the largest groups in America, and so those ones generally make a lot more noise. But Lutherans, they're in theory more chill. Methodists are fairly moderate, though of course recent years there's been a lot of debate about gay marriage, and so there are things going on there. And then Baptists depends. So there's a lot of stuff going on theologically at all times in America, and it never stops.
Yep. Yeah. And unfortunately, right, since that's all the religion that I think more dominantly influences this game, like, rather than thinking about, say, early modern ideas of someone like, I don't know, what's his name? It's not... Diaz writes the history of New Spain. Who's the one who writes the one that's actually like, wait, maybe we did a bad?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Oh god, why brain? Thank you. Sorry, we're gonna silence the thing. But it's not Bernal Diaz, because that's the conquest of New Spain. Who is the other one?
I can't think of his name either.
I know. I'm trying to find it.
AC says De La Casas?
De La Casas, thank you. That is exactly who I was thinking of, and my brain just, like, stopped. But yes, right, instead of thinking about how, like, De Las Casas thinks about... I mean, theologically is super interesting, but, right, thinks about the history of his time. Right, I don't think you get that sort of question or concern present in this game.
Yeah, even in, like, the American colonies, there were some voices that were actually concerned about the well-being of the Native Americans, but the majority of the rhetoric was more justifying their place on the land and their claim to it, which super gross, hate it. But this game does not get into anything like that.
Exactly.
With questioning, hey, colonialism might be a little bit bad, and just...
Yeah. I don't know, it's super interesting because I have to wonder, like, what sort of idea of what counts as a colonial action is there? Or, right, what actions actually count as colonialism in the minds of the game devs, and most players. And... because obviously that's what this is, I mean...
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of?
Yeah.
It reminds me of towards the end of the 19th and starting into the early 20th century as well. There was a belief that Native Americans are either extinct or going extinct. They basically just started full-on ignoring the presence of Native Americans, believing that they would be gone. And so ideas developed of, hey, there's all this untouched wilderness, we should protect it. And so national parks. But honestly, that's starting to feel like this game's attitude towards indigenous people, just straight up ignoring their existence or saying they're all gone at this point.
Exactly.
And just moving into, in their view, untouched, unclaimed wilderness. When in actuality, no. But
Right. It's always so weird because, I mean, yes, but also no. Right, because it is simultaneously, right, oh yes, there's this unclaimed wilderness, we can go off and, like, claim it, but also it is perpetually unclaimed wilderness. And, like,
Yeah.
full of settlements. The settlements are all abandoned except for a small handful.
mhm.
And so, right, the wilderness is not only unclaimed and therefore protectable, but perpetually unclaimable and hostile.
Yeah,
And
which
hostile through primarily undeath, but also very strangely shaped large cats.
I want to try and make comparisons to modern conceptions of the Wild West, but I'm not sure that's entirely apt. Just because lack of, at least in the Wild West, the existential threat was Native Americans in their popular conceptions,
Exactly.
not, any of the hardship they actually faced with lack of food, disease, any kind of crime on their part, etc.
Yeah. There definitely is none of the actual hardship. There's a lot of making up something that vaguely might resemble a hardship, I guess.
Question in chat. In America's colonialism, there was and still is sort of strains of religious nationalism. Justification wasn't there. Yes. They said sort of like a manifest destiny was what God wants. That is very, very true. There was a ton of religious justification to American imperialism and colonialism.
I mean, Columbia is portrayed as pseudo-angelic, if not actively angelic.
Yes. And there's a repeated pattern in American civil religion and just religious discourse, explicit religious discourse in general, that America is a nation favored by God, and there's an inherently nationalistic theme in that. They're nationalistic strands. And so, beyond that, there's a lot of rhetoric around America will be a new Jerusalem. Think of the Puritans like a city on a hill, or just any kind of that. America is the promised land in some ways. That comes back a lot. And so you'll see a lot of that in American justifications for colonialism. And also in the 19th century, they started to see themselves as a benevolent empire, that they were good and they were virtuous and Protestant especially. And they were fighting against, like, Catholic Mexico or Catholic Spain in the Spanish-American War. And so they were they actually justified the seizure of Spanish colonies in, like, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines because they were fighting against the Catholic power, and they were fighting against religious oppression from the Catholic Church in their view, and they were going to make them all Protestant. And of course, like, American Catholics kind of rejected that a little bit because, here's their nation now kind of saying they want to make more people Protestant. But yeah, there's a lot of religious justification in American expansion. Even in World War I with Pershing's Crusaders, literally, American intervention is described as a crusade, and it is America seeing itself as favored by God and all that. So
Absolutely. And unfortunately, right, all of that, I think, does... I don't know. It's weird to argue that does or doesn't inform the game. Because in some ways it absolutely does.
in some ways, yes, but I don't see that in the game as much.
Exactly, right? It does insofar as the medievalist right? Because it's hard to extract or separate this religious identity from a historical identity, i.e., era of the Middle Ages, from a nationalist identity. They all just
Yeah,
kind of end up overlapping, and this game is partaking in that overlapping freely, and without, I don't know, I hesitate to say without knowledge, but it just kind of feels that way.
Yeah, the game does not explicitly try and draw upon that religious justification for imperialism in my mind, except for maybe the Covenant.
Exactly.
But they don't try to do it, but they still fall into some of the same narratives that were told by the whole belief in disappearing natives
Exactly.
or unclaimed wilderness.
Uh-huh.
That still follows the same narratives told by the nationalists in America. And
Or the broader
that.
association of, right, modern, in this case, modern digital imperialist acts as being in some way derived from, related to, and heir to medievalist religious-focused imperialisms.
Yeah.
Right, I was specifically thinking of, like, calling intervention in World War One and World War Two crusades.
Using that medieval imagery to justify going off to fight some kind of morally inferior enemy.
Exactly. I mean, underneath my helmet, which is not necessarily Crusader, but is Conquistador, the game literally let me be tonsured.
Yeah. And overall, I don't think that all that imagery is too far disconnected from our time. Although I bring up a lot of 19th century or early 20th century examples,
Oh yeah, no.
it is very present nowadays. Oh boy, with in the chat they brought up how someone was trying to sell them a book called America and the Bible Prophecy. That is very present nowadays, and even in situations like January 6th, Christian nationalism is very alive in America, and it's
Correct.
using some of these same narratives. And if a game plays into that, not always the best outcome.
Yeah. Yep, there's just... It's hard to necessarily feel like there is a... We seem to have a little dueling tent set up.
Those
Look at
are
this
very
pavilion.
colorful.
Look at these pavilions. These pavilions are actually great. Like, let's give credit where credit due. Those pavilions are fab.
Very nice.
Uh-huh. And AC has pointed out, right, that the axe has a kami in it. Which... It does kind of track with Shinto belief, where a kami is an aramitama, which is a rough soul, and then will sort of calm down and become a nigamitama. So, neat that they're actually referencing something, but it is still weird. It's weird that's manifesting in a weapon that is not used for that purpose in Japan. Right. It is very much a win some, lose some. Wow, look at the... Hello? Hello? Hello?
Oh, great.
There we go. The person
There
was
they
there.
are.
Right, the person was there. I could tell because I couldn't run through them.
That is so buggy. You were trying to run through them and they weren't even there.
Yes.
Great.
Oh, great. And now you're saying you've got a new quest there that has not spawned. Hysterical.
Wonderful.
Well-programmed game, no bugs. Anyway... we have a couple of things to do. Like, all of these. Eventually I'll respec this into an actually, organized thing, but right now, meh.
Very fair.
Uh, Interesting. But yeah, right. They have. It's a little bit of exactly AC as you say. It's a little bit of a reference to Shinto belief or something at least. But by and large, there's like no shrines to back it up.
Yeah, which
Right.
is a shame.
There's no signs of active practice because the dominant culture space of this game is very clearly modern and Protestant.
Yeah, but I'd argue that even in this sense, even though it's kind of culturally Protestant, Protestantism doesn't really shine through in any meaningful sense either. Because it's just, it's the impression of Protestantism. It's not any of the actual colorful, fun, vibrant parts of it.
Exactly.
You
I
don't-
think this is probably our best account of it here in the Covenant's doctrine. Is like the most theology we actually get. Keep faith. Shall we rejoice? Humankind's oldest enemy is gone. Death is dead. We have reached the promised land, yet there are some who call it a false promise. This land seeks our ruin, they cry, but even more dangerous are the enemies within. Moral weakness blinds us to the truth. Those who live in the dark can never recognize paradise. But where eyes fail, faith sees. The Covenant carries the spark. In our time of need, the spark carries us. Its clarity is our greatest gift. We bring the light of the spark to the darkest corners. We keep it shining at any cost against any foe. And one day it will shine bright enough to reveal paradise itself.
Okay, so that actually hits a few major Protestant theology points, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of the Puritans with, honestly, replace spark for gospel, and it reads just like the Christian text, justifying their place on the land as the promised land. They're saying keep faith, which sounds, you could say, similar to sola fides, which is faith alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the whole belief that you're justified to, or you're saved through faith alone. And then it hits the point of it's their goal to spread that gospel or religion or faith to all the corners of the earth and illuminate it. That light and dark imagery shows up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is definitely Protestant.
It is definitely
But-
Protestant.
All in name and without any of the fun parts, I guess. There are
Yeah.
very fun parts to Protestantism, trust me, in studying like mostly American Protestant religious history, but
Uh-huh.
they definitely recreate the overall impression of it, and so
Yeah.
it is culturally Protestant. I'll give you that.
Okay. We're gonna just salvage a bunch of stuff that I'm not gonna use or need or stuff, and we're gonna pretend we're ignoring the person that is talking somewhat too loudly on open mic. The joys of an MMO. Actually talking. Who does that? Like who honestly does
Yeah,
that? Boo.
without
Ooh.
using the chat.
But well, yeah, I think we are wrapping up because I think there is not a whole lot left for us to be doing here.
Yeah.
We've been going for 2.5 hours, so that's
Not bad.
that's about time.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're not supposed to shoot people. You get shot too.
I think we're headed
But
north.
let's get out of town into a quiet spot, and then go from there.
We do have a question in the chat, which
There
segues
was.
into the ending nicely.
Exactly. So what's coming up for Historians versus New World, and what's coming up for the future of the channel? So as we're getting close to wrapping things up, getting to the final interview bit, Historians vs. New World will not have an episode next week. This is the last episode of it for the calendar year, but it will return in 2022. I have a few more guests lined up, and I'm trying to organize one more kind of extra special thing to conclude it. We'll see if that is possible to set up. If not, it'll be no big deal. It would then be probably 3 more guests, and then a concluding episode of just me talking about it. To kind of sum up the thoughts. So that's, we committed to at least 4 more episodes. Oops. at least 4 more episodes of Historians versus New World, so plenty more to see, plenty more to talk about in this game. Because somehow, despite there not necessarily being a whole lot of stuff, there is also a lot of stuff because every person has a really fascinating little bit of a different insight into what the heck is going on.
Exactly. That's the fun part of so many different backgrounds and approaches.
Exactly. As for what's coming up in the future, though, we've got the next big game coming up. It will be God of War. So we're going to go back to our roots. We're going to play God of War, and then we're going to play AC Valhalla more, and then we're going to play more God of War. So that game releases on January 14th. We'll be playing it on launch day, and we will probably have guest friends who, at various points through that, I don't know if it'll be the whole series or not. We need to be in contact with them to figure out what's actually viable, what's not. But we'll see. That'll be the next big long-form game, though. We'll see what else we've got for kind of winter games. I've got some just like more casual stuff. Some Disco Elysium potentially coming up. All of that. So we've got a lot of things going on, and there's a lot to look forward to coming up in the next year. Because we're getting close to the end of 2021, which is just crazy to say. Just absolutely nuts. Anyway.
Yeah, processing 2022 is gonna be a time.
Oh yeah, 2022 is going to be interesting, but hopefully brings good things at least for the stream and for what we're able to do with the stream. Because we're at 1948 followers right now, which is a huge audience. It's more than I ever thought we'd make. So the goal this time is to start getting more people to come in, more people to actually say hello, visit, participate in chat, because the more people there are, the more conversations we can have, and the better off it is for everyone. So
Yeah, you all asked amazing questions and brought up really good topics, so thank you all.
Exactly. So, let's roll back to the interview room for our kind of final questions. First, what were your overall thoughts on New World, Reed, now that we've seen both the holiday event and pretty much at least a little bit of religious diversity, at least hinted at, if not actively attested, in the game itself?
I was very happy to see at least some diversity, though I found most of it kind of lackluster, and the game very much the game should follow show don't tell and actually show different religions rather than just vaguely allude to them or allude to some kind of religious practice without actually showing it.
Agreed.
It's all fairly surface level. Again, with their just the Covenant too, although it hits a few of the points that I would probably expound on, it doesn't really give much more than a vague impression of Protestantism.
Sure.
As I've said before, it's nothing in depth, and it's kind of just like a kiddie pool where you expect something a little bit more from it and something more fleshed out that makes you appreciate the world, and it just doesn't come. The world feels so hollow in a way.
Yeah. In that vein, what would be or do you have thoughts, I suppose I should say, as to what the game could do to actually better show religious practice?
To better show it? Oh, yes. Many thoughts. It could have actually had maybe members of a covenant or something undergoing a kind of religious ritual, actually, like maybe in the background you might not even need to interact with them, just have that be seen. Elements of material religion in any meaningful sense beyond a copy and pasted church building would be nice.
Sure.
I know that's a little ambitious for Amazon, but maybe have a
also,
little bit of
just with how big the world is, you can't necessarily give. Right, it is hard to make every town have a slightly different church, like in historical reality.
Of course, but like if you had the pulpit and the table were in the table by the altar were both very generic, and I couldn't help but feel, hey, if there was maybe a tiny bit of religious art in the corner, or if there was some kind of incense burner somewhere, or if there was if there were stained glass that actually made an image or related to their religion, some kind of visual cues of developing the space a little bit more would be wonderful. Or like even equipment, like if you could put on vestments or some kind of religious weapon, maybe even any kind of material religion would be wonderful if they don't provide more like textual explanation for religious belief and practice that is more diverse than, hey, everyone has the same religious beliefs here and that's it.
Sure. You're saying that the loot modifier of the priest that makes your life staff do more heals isn't enough? Mild shock.
It's just it definitely feels like they do have a in-game religion already made. I don't think I can deny that it's not a religion, but it's not a religion in any meaningful practical sense where you don't see people actually participating in it.
Yeah.
It is just kind of a shiny picture to put up on the wall, pretty much.
Exactly.
If I were to just make an analogy.
Yeah, one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about, but would be absolutely relevant, is earlier we walked past a couple of cultists and the corruption, right? Because that's actually the place where we see the only things that might kind of sort of look like ritual. Is that corrupted cultists are like a thing, and they'll stand in front of these big spires of corruption and do stuff. Like, nothing actually seems to come of it, but they do stuff.
It's still ritual, and that's interesting to me. I feel like that almost feeds into modern conceptions of ritual is bad and mysticism bad, but that might be a stretch.
No, I think it's
there's been a
pretty fair.
recent rejection of ritual, and I feel like that might lead into that.
Exactly, right? It's drawing on the idea of the spooky pagan cult.
Yeah.
Except it's the spooky corruption cult. And it is religion that is outdoors, that is, I guess, has a really defined small in-group. In this case, literally having to be corrupted and therefore intrinsically evil, and mindless. And that exists to some goal other than the moral betterment of society.
Yeah, it's definitely... It exists in kind of a place of opposition to the good in the game's view, the good religion that they have with the Covenant. It's, even though religious life is more complex than purely that, but...
Just a little bit.
I wonder if you could spin it that this is a form of the cultists are a form of popular religion in some way. But I don't know if that entirely tracks, because it could. I just don't know enough about the game and what the cultists are and do.
Exactly.
But
right,
it very much could be a form of popular religion.
I think the main obstacle to that is that the corruption is literally like turns you mindless. And exists mostly for the furtherance. Seems to exist mostly for the furtherance of itself.
What would be really cool is actual popular religion being added to give some depth to it.
Yup. But yeah, even with that, I think given that people are able to willingly give themselves over to it, it's at least implied that that's possible. I don't think that totally negates a reading of it as popular religion.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there's at least merit there to considering that idea further.
It's definitely a religion that is not officially sanctioned, if it is a religion, and it's practiced by, I assume, kind of people on the outskirts of society.
Given that they're in the giant, dark, spooky areas that you're trying to that is the main plot of the game is trying to stop those from showing up.
Yeah, then
so,
definitely the
periphery is an understatement. It's more like so far outside that, like, there's the periphery, and then there's the beyond the periphery, and there's somewhere over there.
Yep. But
so yeah,
there is just a lot of fleshing out they could do, but...
God, there's so much room. And, I won't say that it's totally hopeless, Right, because I guess the question to you is, were there any bright spots that you saw?
Bright spots. Yeah, bright spots. I did honestly like that one document you read out, the Covenant Doctrine. It had some depth to it, as it implied there are dissenters, and it implied it gave their goals and reasons, and basically everything short of an "I want" song for the faction.
Exactly.
But
Which
it's,
is every faction has something like that, because that's how you're supposed to read those to decide which one you want to sign up for. Yeah, so that's literally what it is. It is the I want song for the faction, so that the players can sign up.
I just that was, I think, pretty decent from like a textual analysis. It could very easily be expounded upon and built on in maybe other documents that they leave around the world, or future events could have actual Covenant people participating in a religious festival of some kind, because in this, they're not participating in the Winter Festival at all.
They don't seem to be, yeah. It seems to be the Winter Wanderer is just a Yeti who is driven out from the homeland of the other Yetis, and so wanders around trying to, like, not freeze to death.
Yeah.
Which is wild. Just bonkers.
It's so far out there, but any kind of actual depth to the religion can be built upon from that. And they already have the spaces in which they can do this. They have the space of the church. They have the people present in the church with, like, NPCs. They have everything there. They just need to make that interaction with the wider world happen.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. So, last question is a question I ask everybody. Tomorrow you wake up and Amazon has used its infinite money to just put you in charge of the game. Related to what we've talked about, what's the first thing you do?
Oh dear. First thing I'll do.
Right,
Honestly,
the last two guests have said, shut it down, we're gonna Final Fantasy 14 this shit. Let's do.
Those are very good choices, but I'm always someone who has hope. Like, I had hope whenever you're going to go visit the Templar. My first thing to do would probably just to open up Word documents and just start writing new flavor text and, like, documents for the church. Maybe like a hymn or two, or some prayers, or like kind of a ritual outline, something to actually give life to this world.
Sure.
If you had maybe even notes in the cemetery to the deceased, or to people who have turned into the lost.
Yeah.
Honestly, that would be really cool if people were leaving notes to people who have became lost.
Some of the quests hint towards that. Yeah, where, right, there are quests where you have to fight something that's lost inside the cemetery.
Yeah.
So there's like hints towards that, but I like that.
So my first course of action would just to be start writing flavor text for this world to make it seem more alive.
I like that.
I know that's a less than stellar answer. It's more so I will just fix it myself, but it's something, and I feel like that's something that I could change immediately.
Right, and the corollary to that is, right, you hire more writers with the explicit goal of, we are adding a lot of really, in some ways pretty mundane, but still useful dialogue and flavor text to make these spaces feel like they have a past and are not video game spaces.
Because, like I said before with my paper on cemeteries and how cemeteries can allude to a past and build up kind of a past because it references people who came before. These cemeteries, because no one dies, I don't know where they fit in timeline-wise. I don't know why they exist, and explanations would be very much needed and appreciated.
Agreed.
But I feel like if they gave some kind of, although it's mundane, it's, oh, I now have to explain why this cemetery is here, and oh, I now have to write like a boring ritual for a church. Even though I would enjoy the hell out of that, that's amazing. But I would love to write that. But the thing is that it's mundane from a standpoint of I'm not writing an epic quest for my players to go on. I'm not I'm not doing something that the player itself. I'm not like writing new loot or like creating that or doing something that creates a grand scheme. It's on a very small scale though, and I feel like that would be very appreciated from the player base, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's. I don't know how many players would actually interact with it, but just
True.
just a clearer chronology. I think I agree. Just building out that world space to make this space feel less fake.
You know,
I
even
think
if
does go a long
players
ways.
didn't interact with it much, I think having something there, having something that they have the option to interact with, would be good.
Yeah.
If they could sit down in one of the pews in the church and maybe like lower their head, I feel like that could do wonders for the at least religion in the game, because it's roughly prayer. You could have your character actually interact with it. It's very minor, but it's something that is physical that the player can now choose to opt into and experience the world for themselves rather than just be an observer of it.
Agreed. Awesome. Well, where can people find you online if they wanna keep talking, or is there anything else you want to like promote while you're here?
Well, currently most of the papers I'm submitting to be published have been submitted or are being edited by me, so I don't have any papers to direct you to, but and I'm not comfortable directing you to my website articles, but you can just find me at the Ludo Historians Discord or on my own religious studies server. I have a server that is more geared towards talking about religious studies. But if you have any questions, just ask me or ping me there or just DM me. I'm always happy to talk. I'm very passionate about what I do, even though I do a lot, and I'm always happy to help.
Yeah, awesome. So with that, we're gonna wrap up for the day. If you have not yet and are watching, do consider following the channel, which gives you access to a bunch of very fabulous medieval emotes. And if you're really feeling spicy, do consider subscribing to further help support the channel. A lot of what I do here is only possible because of subscribers. And stay tuned for more news on more ways to help support us coming up soon. If you don't like the idea of giving Amazon money, that's okay. Couple weeks, I'll have some news for you. Otherwise, I hope everyone who is still around has a lovely rest of their evenings. Thank you all for coming. This has been Historians vs. New World, and we'll be back on Friday for a nice long Christmas Eve Pathless stream. We're just gonna have a chill time with that. See how far we can get. We'll start earlier. Right, we're gonna start earlier, run longer, because I've got nothing going on. So, may as well spend it with you lovely people.
Nice.
Awesome. And with that, I hope you all have a good night. And we will see you next time.